Qur'an, Chapter 8, Surah Al-Anfal, by Sayyid Qutb. Translation by Muhammad Al-Amrani. In the name of God, the most compassionate, the most merciful. They ask you about the spoils of war. Say, the spoils belong to God and the Messenger. So remain conscious of God and set things right among yourselves, and obey God and His Messenger if you are truly believers. 8:1. True believers are only those whose hearts tremble with awe when God is mentioned, and when His signs are recited to them, their faith increases, and they place their trust in their Sustainer. 8:2. Those who establish prayer, and out of what we have provided for them they spend in charity. 8:3. It is they who are the true believers. They shall have exalted ranks in the sight of their Sustainer, as well as forgiveness and a most generous provision. 8:4. Even as your Sustainer caused you to go forth from your home in the cause of truth, although a group of the believers were reluctant, 8:5, they disputed with you about the truth after it had become clear, as if they were being driven to death whilst they looked on. 8:6. And remember when God promised you, one of the two groups of your enemies, that it would be yours, yet you wished that the unarmed group would be yours, whereas God willed to establish the truth by His words and to cut off the roots of the disbelievers. 8:7, so that He might make the truth manifest and bring falsehood to nothing, even though the evildoers may hate it. 8:8. And remember when you called upon your Sustainer for help, and He responded to you, I shall reinforce you with 1,000 angels following one another in succession. 8:9. And God made this only as a glad tiding for you, so that your hearts might find rest thereby. For victory comes only from God. Verily, God is almighty, wise. 8:10. And remember when He caused drowsiness to overcome you as a source of reassurance from Him, and sent down water from the skies to purify you thereby, and to remove from you the defilement of Satan, and to strengthen your hearts, and to steady your steps. 8:11. And remember when your Sustainer inspired the angels. I am with you, so make firm those who have attained to faith. I shall cast terror into the hearts of those who deny the truth, so strike above their necks and strike off their fingertips. 8:12. This was so because they defied God and His Messenger. For whoever defies God and His Messenger, behold, God is severe in punishment. 8:13. This is your punishment, so taste it, and know that for those who deny the truth there is the torment of the fire. 8:14. O you who have attained to faith, when you meet those who deny the truth in battle array, do not turn your backs to them. 8:15. For whoever turns his back on that day, unless it be as a stratagem of war, or to regroup with another force, he will indeed draw upon himself the wrath of God, and his abode will be hell. How wretched an end! 8:16. And you did not slay them, but it was God who slew them. And you did not throw when you threw, but it was God who threw, so that He might test the believers by a fair test from Himself. Verily, God is all-hearing, all-knowing. 8:17. This was so, and know that God will weaken the designs of those who deny the truth. 8:18. If you sought a decision, then surely a decision has come to you. But if you desist, it will be better for you. And if you return to hostility, so shall we return. And your forces will avail you nothing, no matter how numerous they may be. For verily God is with the believers. 8:19. O you who have attained to faith, obey God and His Messenger, and do not turn away from Him while you hear His call. 8:20. And do not be like those who say, we hear, while they do not hear. 8:21. Verily, the worst of all creatures in the sight of God are the deaf, the dumb, those who do not use their reason. 8:22. Had God perceived any good in them, He would indeed have made them hear. But even if He made them hear, they would have turned away in aversion. 8:23. O you who have attained to faith, respond to God and the Messenger when He calls you to that which gives you life, and know that God comes in between a man and his heart, and that unto Him you shall be gathered. 8:24. And beware of a trial that will not strike only those among you who have committed wrong, and know that God is severe in retribution. 8:25. And remember when you were few and oppressed in the land, fearing that people might snatch you away, but he sheltered you and strengthened you with his help and provided you with good things so that you might be grateful. 8:26. O you who have attained to faith, do not betray God and the messenger, nor knowingly betray the trusts that have been entrusted to you. 8:27. And know that your wealth and your children are but a trial, and that with God lies a mighty reward. 8:28. O you who have attained to faith, if you remain conscious of God, he will grant you a criterion to discern right from wrong, and will efface your bad deeds and forgive you. For God is limitless in his bounty. 8:29. The theme of this first lesson in the Surah is to clarify God's ruling regarding the spoils of war, the gains acquired by the Muslims during their striving in God's cause after disputes arose among the people of Badr regarding their division. God directed them to his judgment concerning the spoils, just as he directed them to his consciousness, obedience to him, and to his messenger. He awakened in their hearts the sentiments of faith and piety. Then he reminded them of what they had desired for themselves, the caravan and its riches, while God willed for them victory and honor. He recounted how the battle unfolded, with them being few in number and resources, while their enemies were numerous in men and equipment. He reminded them of how he reinforced them with the help of angels, how he sent down rain to quench their thirst, cleanse them, and make the ground firm beneath their feet so that they would not sink into the sand. He reminded them of the drowsiness that overcame them, filling their hearts with peace and tranquility. And he told how he cast terror into the hearts of their enemies and inflicted upon them severe punishment. Thereafter he commanded the believers to stand firm in every battle, no matter how the initial appearance of the enemy's strength might seem. For it is God who kills, God who directs the blows, and God who governs all affairs. The believers are but a veil through which God's decree and power are manifested, and he does with them as he wills. Then he mocked the disbelievers who before the battle had invoked a decision, praying that ruin would befall the more misguided and severer in breaking ties of kinship. To them he said, "If you sought a decision, then surely the decision has come to you." He warned the believers not to emulate the hypocrites who hear but do not truly hear, for they fail to respond. The lesson concludes with repeated calls to the believers to respond to God and his messenger when they summon them to that which gives life, even if it may appear to them as death and destruction. He reminded them of how they were once few and oppressed, fearing that people might snatch them away. Yet God sheltered them, supported them with his help, and provided for them from the good things so that they might be grateful. He promised to bestow upon them a criterion in their hearts and their actions if they remain conscious of him. And with this, he pardons their sins, forgives their shortcomings, and offers them rewards from his bounty, which are far greater than any spoils or worldly gains. They ask you about the spoils of war. Say, the spoils belong to God and his messenger. So remain conscious of God. Set things right among yourselves and obey God and his messenger if you are truly believers. True believers are those whose hearts tremble with awe when God is mentioned. And when his signs are recited to them, their faith increases and they place their trust in their sustainer. They are those who establish prayer and spend out of what we have provided for them. It is they who are the true believers. For them there shall be exalted ranks in the sight of their sustainer, as well as forgiveness and a generous provision. We previously mentioned, in the general introduction to the surah, some of the accounts regarding the revelation of these verses. Here we add further reports to evoke the context in which the surah as a whole was revealed, and specifically the verses concerning the spoils of war, so that we might vividly recall the realities of the Muslim community during the first great encounter after the establishment of the Islamic State in Medina. Ibn Kathir, in his commentary, mentioned narrations from Abu Dawood, Al-Nasa'i, Ibn Jarir, Ibn Mardawayh, Ibn Hibban, and Al-Hakim through various chains from Dawood, Ibn Abi Hind, from Ikrimah, from Ibn Abbas, who said, "On the day of Badr, the messenger of God, peace be upon him, said, 'Whoever does such and such shall have such and such.' The young men of the group hastened to fulfill this, while the elders remained under the banners. When the spoils were collected, they came to claim what had been promised to them. But the elders said, "Do not take everything for yourselves, for we were your support. Had you been defeated, you would have fallen back upon us." They disputed, and thus God revealed, "They ask you about the spoils. Say, the spoils belong to God and his messenger." And he also revealed, "Obey God and his messenger if you are truly believers." Al-Tari also narrated from Al-Kalbi, from Abu Salih, from Ibn Abbas, who said, "On the day of Badr, the messenger of God, peace be upon him, said, 'Whoever kills an enemy shall have such and such, and whoever captures a prisoner shall have such and such.' Abu al-Yasir brought 2 prisoners and said, 'O Messenger of God, you promised us.' Sa'd ibn Ubadah stood and said, 'O Messenger of God, if you give this to them, nothing will remain for your companions.' We did not refrain from participating out of lack of courage or reluctance, but we remained in our positions to protect you, fearing that the enemy might come from behind." A dispute arose, and the verse was revealed. "They ask you about the spoils. Say, the spoils belong to God and his messenger." And the ruling regarding 1/5 of the spoils was revealed as well. "And know that whatever you gain as spoils of war, 1/5 belongs to God." Imam Ahmad also narrated from Sa'd ibn Abi Waqqas, who said, "On the day of Badr, my brother Umayyah was killed, and I killed Sa'id ibn al-As and took his sword, which was known as Du al-Katifa. I brought it to the Prophet, peace be upon him, who told me, 'Place it with the collected spoils.' I returned, overwhelmed with sorrow at the loss of my brother and having to relinquish the sword. Then the Surah Al-Anfal was revealed, and the Prophet, peace be upon him, said, 'Go and take your spoil.'" Imam Ahmad also reported from Sa'd ibn Malik, who said, "I said, 'O Messenger of God, God has granted me healing today from the disbelievers, so grant me this sword.' He replied, 'This sword is neither for you nor for me, place it down.' I left feeling disheartened, thinking the sword might be given to someone who had not fought as I had. Then a man called me from behind, saying, 'The Prophet summons you.' I returned, and he said, 'You asked me for the sword, and it was not mine to give. Now it has been granted to me, and I give it to you.' And the verse was revealed, 'They ask you about the spoils. Say, the spoils belong to God and his messenger.'" These narrations give us a vivid picture of the atmosphere in which the verses of Al-Anfal were revealed. One may find it astonishing that the people of Badr would dispute over spoils, given that they were either emigrants who had left everything behind for the sake of God, or Ansar who had welcomed the emigrants and shared their homes and wealth with them. However, the narrations themselves provide some explanation. The spoils were tied to distinctions of valour in battle, serving as a testimony to one's efforts, and the people of Badr were eager for such recognition from the Prophet, peace be upon him, and from God, particularly in their first great victory over the disbelievers. This eagerness had so overwhelmed the believers that it overshadowed another essential consideration, one they had forgotten, until God, in his infinite wisdom, reminded them thereof, and guided them back to it. It was the necessity of mutual forbearance in their dealings with one another, and the need for harmony among their hearts and feelings. This was poignantly expressed by Ubadah ibn al-Samit, may God be pleased with him, when he said, "It was concerning us, those who fought at Badr, that this verse was revealed, for we disputed over the spoils and displayed ill temper in our behaviour. So God took the matter out of our hands and entrusted it to the Messenger of God, peace and blessings be upon him. Thus, God Almighty disciplined them with divine pedagogy through both word and deed. He removed the issue of the spoils entirely from their control and returned it to the authority of the Messenger of God, peace be upon him, until he revealed his decree concerning the division of all war gains. From then on, it was no longer a matter of personal entitlement over which they could quarrel. Rather, it became a bounty from God, apportioned by his messenger in accordance with the knowledge imparted to him by his sustainer. In addition to this practical educative measure, there was a long and profound divine exhortation beginning with these verses and continuing through those that followed. They ask you about the spoils of war. Say, the spoils belong to God and the messenger. So remain conscious of God and mend the relations between yourselves and obey God and his messenger if you are truly believers. The call directed at these hearts, those that had quarrelled over the spoils, was a call to God consciousness. For indeed the Creator of hearts, who knows their innermost secrets, is aware that nothing can draw the human heart away from attachment to the transient adornments of this life, and the disputes they engender, even if such disputes arise in the context of noble striving and sacrifice, except the awakening of a profound consciousness of God, fear of his displeasure, and the yearning for his good pleasure in both this world and the hereafter. A heart that does not attach itself to God, that does not fear his wrath or ardently seek his pleasure, will forever remain captive to the weight of worldly attachments and unable to soar in the freedom of spiritual liberation. It is through God consciousness that these hearts are bridled, enabling them to be led with ease and grace. And it is by this divine rein that the Qur'an steers these hearts toward reconciliation and the mending of their relations. So remain conscious of God and mend the relations between yourselves. And by the same rein it leads them toward obedience to God and his messenger, and obey God and his messenger. The first act of obedience required of them here is their acceptance of God's decree concerning the spoils of war. These spoils were no longer to belong to any individual warrior, but their ownership reverted entirely to God and his messenger. The authority to allocate them now rested solely with God and his messenger. Thus, the believers were obliged to submit to this decree with hearts untroubled and spirits content. They were also called upon to mend their relationships, purify their feelings toward one another, and cleanse their hearts of all discord, if you are truly believers. For faith must have a tangible, practical manifestation that bears witness to its existence and attests to its truth. As the messenger of God, peace and blessings be upon him, said, faith is neither wishful thinking nor outward display. Rather, it is that which takes root in the heart and is confirmed by action. Thus, the Qur'an repeatedly emphasizes this principle, affirming the words of the Prophet, peace be upon him, and defining true faith. It removes faith from the realm of mere verbal utterance or wishful longing, situating it firmly in the realm of reality and action. The passage then goes on to describe the attributes of true faith as desired by the sustainer of this religion, thereby clarifying what is meant by the divine statement, if you are truly believers. Here then is the faith that God desires of them. True believers are only those whose hearts tremble with awe whenever God is mentioned, and whose faith is strengthened whenever his messages are conveyed to them, and who place their trust in their sustainer alone. Those who establish prayer and spend out of what we have provided for them. It is they alone who are truly believers. For them are ranks with their sustainer and forgiveness and a generous provision. The Quranic expression here is precise in its linguistic structure, reflecting with exactitude the profound meaning it seeks to convey. The phrase begins with the restrictive particle only, inama, leaving no room for ambiguity. There is no justification for interpreting this as referring merely to perfect faith. Had God willed to say so, he would have done so explicitly. Rather, the expression is clear and definitive. Those who possess these qualities, whose actions and feelings reflect these attributes, are the true believers. Those who lack these attributes in their totality are not believers at all. This is further emphasized by the concluding declaration, it is they alone, who are truly believers. This declaration affirms the reality that those who are not true believers are not believers in any sense. The Quranic expressions clarify one another, and God says, what is there beyond truth but error? Thus, what is not truth is error, and the opposite of true believers cannot be those who are partially believers. The precise Quranic expressions cannot be subjected to interpretations that dilute their meaning or undermine their clarity. For this reason, the early generations of Muslims understood from these verses that anyone who failed to find these qualities within themselves was devoid of faith altogether. As Ibn Kathir relates, Ali ibn Talha narrated from Ibn Abbas regarding the verse, True believers are only those whose hearts tremble with awe whenever God is mentioned. He explained, "The hypocrites feel nothing in their hearts when God is mentioned, nor do they believe in his signs. They do not place their trust in him, nor do they pray when unseen by others, nor do they pay the zakah due on their wealth. Thus God declares that they are not believers." Then he describes the believers by saying, "True believers are only those whose hearts tremble with awe whenever God is mentioned." So they fulfill his obligations and perform their duties. And when his verses are recited to them, they increase them in faith, meaning in affirmation of the truth, and they place their trust solely in their sustainer, seeking no one else. From the nature of these attributes, it becomes clear that faith cannot exist without them. This is not a matter of the completeness or deficiency of faith, it is a matter of its very existence or absence. True believers are only those whose hearts tremble with awe whenever God is mentioned. This trembling is the profound reverence that seizes the heart of a believer when reminded of God's commands or prohibitions. It is the heart's encounter with his majesty and magnificence alongside its awareness of its own shortcomings and sins. This reverence drives the believer toward obedience and action. Al-Dada, may God be pleased with her, described it as follows. "A trembling reverence in the heart is like the burning of dry palm leaves. Do you not feel its shiver?" Someone replied, "Indeed I do." She said, "Then call upon God at that moment, for prayer soothes it. It is a condition that overwhelms the heart, requiring supplication for relief and tranquility. It is the state found in a believer's heart, when reminded of God's commands or prohibitions, a state that compels them to act in accordance with his will, awestruck and conscious of his greatness. And when his verses are recited to them, it increases them in faith. The believing heart finds in the verses of this Qur'an that which increases it in faith and leads it to tranquility. Indeed, this Qur'an engages directly with the human heart without intermediaries. Nothing stands between it and the heart except disbelief, which veils the heart from it and it from the heart. When this veil is lifted through faith, the heart tastes the sweetness of the Qur'an and finds in its recurring rhythms an increase in faith that leads to serenity. Just as the rhythms of the Qur'an increase the believing heart in faith, it is the believing heart alone that perceives these rhythms and experiences this increase. Thus, the Qur'an repeatedly affirms this truth with statements such as, "Indeed, in that is a sign for the believers, and indeed in that are signs for a people who believe." This was illustrated in the words of one of the companions, may God's pleasure be upon them, who said, "We were given faith before we were given the Qur'an." Through this faith, they found in the Qur'an a unique flavor, aided by the atmosphere they breathed as they lived the Qur'an in practice and reality, not merely as a matter of intellectual appreciation or detached understanding. The narrations surrounding the revelation of the verses testify to this. For instance, it is related about Sa'd ibn Malik, who once asked the Messenger of God, peace and blessings be upon him, to grant him a sword before the revelation of the verse that clarified that the spoils belong to the Prophet, to be distributed as he deems fit. The Prophet, peace and blessings be upon him, said to him, "This sword is neither yours nor mine. Place it down." Later, when Sa'd was called back after leaving the sword behind, he expected that God the Exalted might have revealed something concerning him. He said, "I thought perhaps God had revealed something about me." The Prophet, peace and blessings be upon him, told him, "You had asked me for a sword that was not mine to give, but now it has been gifted to me and I grant it to you." Thus, they lived in communion with their sustainer and with this Qur'an that was being revealed to them. It was a profound experience, an extraordinary era in the history of humankind. Consequently, they savoured the Qur'an in a manner unlike any other. Their engagement with the Qur'an was intensified further by their active efforts to establish its guidance in real life. Though the first generation's unique circumstances cannot be repeated, the second aspect, the active endeavour to bring the Qur'an into the reality of life, can recur whenever a believing group rises to establish this religion anew, as the early Muslim community once did. It is this believing group, moving with the Qur'an to re-establish the religion of God in the lives of people that truly taste the Qur'an and finds in its recitation an increase in faith. This is because they are already believers, for whom faith is a matter of action and movement to establish the religion after the resurgence of Jahiliyyah that has once again overwhelmed the earth. For them, faith is not a matter of wishful thinking, but what is firmly rooted in the heart and verified by deeds, and upon their sustainer they rely. This reliance is exclusive to him, as the structure of the phrase indicates. They do not associate anyone with him in their seeking of assistance or reliance. As Imam Ibn Kathir commented in his tafsir, that is, they hope for none but him, they turn to none but him, they seek refuge only in his protection, they ask none but him, and they desire only him. They know that whatever he wills comes to pass, and whatever he does not will does not come to pass, that he is the sole disposer of all affairs without partner, and that none can overturn his decree. He is swift in account. For this reason, Sayyid ibn Jubayr said, "Reliance upon God is the essence of faith. This is the purity of belief in the oneness of God and the sincerity of worship directed solely to him. It is inconceivable for the heart to simultaneously hold both the oneness of God and reliance upon another along with him. Those who find in their hearts dependence on anyone or anything must first examine their faith in God. However, reliance upon God does not negate taking the means. The believer engages with the means out of faith in God and obedience to his command to take them, but without attributing to the means the power to produce results. The believer knows that the one who brings about results, just as he brings about the means, is God alone. There is no inherent connection between cause and effect in the believer's perception. Taking the means is an act of worship and obedience, while the realization of results is an independent decree of God that none but He can bring into existence. Thus, the believer's heart is freed from servitude to the means or dependence upon them. At the same time, the believer exhausts the means to the best of their ability, seeking the reward of obeying God in doing so. Modern scientific Jahiliyyah has long clung to what it calls the determinism of natural laws, seeking thereby to deny the decree of God and the unseen that lies beyond human grasp. Yet, in the end, through its own methods and experiments, it has reached a point where it stands helpless before the unseen and the decree of God. Today, it speaks not of certainty but of probabilities in the material realm. What was once declared deterministic has now become probabilistic, leaving the unseen wrapped in mystery and the decree of God as the sole certainty. The words of God the Exalted, "You do not know, perhaps God will bring about something new thereafter," remain the only immutable law, proclaiming the unfettered will of the divine, beyond the constraints of the natural laws by which he governs this universe with his absolute and sovereign decree. Sir James Jeans, the English physicist and mathematician, once said, "The old science spoke with confident assertion that nature could follow but one path, a path predetermined from the beginning of time to its end in an unbroken sequence of cause and effect, leaving no room for deviation. But modern science can say no more than this. That state, A, is likely to be followed by state B or C or D, or any number of other states beyond enumeration. Yes, modern science can assert that the occurrence of B is more probable than C, and that C is more probable than D. It can even calculate the degree of probability for each outcome relative to the others. But it cannot with certainty predict which state will follow. It speaks only of what is probable, while the question of what must occur is left to fate, whatever that fate may be. When the heart is freed from the tyranny of apparent causes, there remains no room in it to rely upon anything other than God from the outset. The decree of God is what brings all things into being, and it alone is the undeniable reality. The apparent causes produce only probabilistic outcomes, speculative at best. This is the great transformation that Islamic belief instills in both the heart and the mind. It is a transformation that modern Jahiliyyah has struggled for 3 centuries to approach intellectually, yet remains far from achieving emotionally or in the practical consequences it entails for engaging with God's decree and the visible causes of the world. This transformation liberates the human being intellectually, emotionally, politically, socially, and morally, indeed, in every aspect of life. Without this liberation, the human being cannot truly be free, for so long as they remain enslaved to supposed deterministic causes, they remain subservient to the will of others or to the forces of nature. Every form of determinism other than the will and decree of God is but a foundation for servitude to something other than God. Thus, the Qur'an emphasizes reliance upon God alone as a criterion for the presence or absence of faith. The Islamic worldview is a cohesive whole, seamlessly integrated with the practical vision of life that this religion seeks to establish for humanity, those who establish prayer. Here we see a visible, active expression of faith after previously encountering its inward, heartfelt dimensions. For faith is what settles in the heart and is affirmed by action. Deeds are the outward testimony to the presence of faith, making it visible to the world. Establishing prayer is more than merely performing it. It is performing it in a manner that fulfills its essence, the complete and proper performance befitting one who stands in the presence of the worshipped one, the sublime. It is not merely about recitation, standing, bowing and prostrating while the heart remains heedless. In its complete form, prayer bears witness to the actual presence of faith, and out of what we have provided for them, they spend. Whether it be through zakah or other forms of charity, they spend of what has been provided to them by the provider. It is only out of what we have provided for them that they spend a portion of what the sustainer has bestowed upon them. For they did not create this wealth themselves, it is but a part of God's provision to them, granted from among countless other blessings that cannot be enumerated. Thus, when they spend, they are merely giving a portion, while retaining the rest for themselves. The wealth they hold is, in truth, God's alone. These are the attributes by which God has, in this context, defined faith: belief in his oneness, a heartfelt response to his remembrance, an inner tremor stirred by his revelations, reliance upon him alone, devotion to prayer, and the spending of a portion of his provision. These attributes do not encompass the entirety of faith's requirements as expounded in other Quranic verses. Rather, they address a specific situation, the discord over the spoils of war and the resulting disharmony among the believers. Thus, these attributes highlight the qualities of true believers that are most relevant to this situation. At the same time, they serve to underscore that those who lack these qualities entirely have not truly attained faith, regardless of whether or not these attributes encompass all the conditions of faith. The Quranic methodology of spiritual education adapts to the realities of the moment, addressing each situation as it arises. It is a pragmatic, dynamic and action-oriented approach, not a theoretical or speculative one, aimed at constructing an abstract system for its own sake. In line with this principle, the concluding statement of the passage reads, "It is they who are truly believers. For them there are ranks with their sustainer and forgiveness and a generous provision. These attributes are found in the heart and actions of the true believer. Whoever lacks them altogether cannot claim the essence of faith." At the same time, these attributes directly address the specific situation that occasioned the revelation of these verses. They confront the desire to prove one's worth in the struggle by declaring that those who embody these qualities will have ranks with their sustainer. They address the moral failings that arose during the disputes over the spoils of war, as noted by Ubadah ibn al-Samit, by affirming that those who embody these qualities will have forgiveness from their sustainer. And they address the quarrels over the division of the spoils by asserting that those who embody these qualities will have a generous provision from their sustainer. Thus, these verses encompass the entire situation along with the emotions and actions it entailed, while also establishing an objective truth. These are the qualities of true believers, and whoever lacks them altogether has not attained the reality of faith. It is they who are truly believers. The first Muslim community understood well that faith must have a reality that one must perceive within oneself. Faith is not a mere claim, nor is it a matter of words spoken by the tongue or idle wishful thinking. Al-Tabarani relates, Muhammad ibn Abdullah al-Hadrami narrated to us saying, Abu Quraib told us saying, Zayd ibn Habab informed us saying, Ibn Lahiyah narrated from Khalid ibn Yazid al-Saksaki, from Sayyid ibn Abi Hilal, from Muhammad ibn Abi al-Jam, from Al-Harith ibn Malik al-Ansari, who once passed by the Messenger of God, peace and blessings be upon him. The Prophet asked him, How are you this morning, O Harith? He replied, This morning I am a true believer. The Prophet said, Consider what you are saying, for every truth has a reality. What then is the reality of your faith? Harith replied, I have turned away from the world, so I have spent my nights sleepless and my days thirsty. It is as though I see the throne of my sustainer manifest before me. It is as though I see the people of paradise visiting one another therein, and it is as though I see the people of hell crying out within it. The Prophet said to him, O Harith, you have truly realized it, so hold fast to it. And he repeated this 3 times. This companion, who earned the testimony of the Messenger of God, peace and blessings be upon him that he truly knew, described his state in a way that vividly captured his emotions and revealed the actions that lay behind them. One who perceives the throne of their sustainer as if it were manifest before them, who sees the people of paradise visiting one another and the people of hell crying out, does not simply stop at seeing. Such a person lives, acts and moves under the influence of these overwhelming emotions which colour every action and decision. Moreover, Harith spoke of his sleepless nights and thirsty days as though he were gazing directly at the throne of his sustainer laid bare before him. The reality of faith must be approached with the utmost seriousness. It must not be reduced to a mere word uttered by the tongue, a word contradicted by the visible reality of one's actions. To take faith lightly is not to honour its true gravity. The seriousness of this reality must be deeply felt, and care in understanding its essence is even more essential, especially for the believing community striving to re-establish this faith in the real world, a world overwhelmed and disfigured by the garb of Jahiliyyah. After this, the passage of the Surah transitions to address the battle from which the spoils of war, the source of their disputes, were derived. It recounts the events and circumstances of that day, along with the believer's actions and emotions. This review makes it clear that the believers themselves were merely instruments of God's decree. Every event that occurred, and every outcome that arose, including the spoils over which they quarrelled, was the result of God's will, His guidance, His planning, and His assistance. What they sought for themselves through this battle was something small and insignificant compared to the grand purpose God intended for them and through this momentous event, which was a decisive turning point in the heavens and on earth. The narrative reminds them that some among them were reluctant to face the battle, just as others were displeased with the division of the spoils. This was to show them that their personal likes and dislikes, their fears and desires were insignificant compared to God's supreme will and His judgment, which is informed by His knowledge of the ultimate outcome of all affairs. Just as your sustainer caused you to go forth from your home in truth, though a group among the believers disliked it. They argued with you concerning the truth after it had become manifest, as though they were being driven toward death while they looked on. And when God promised you, one of the 2 groups, that it would be yours, you wished that the one without strength would be yours. But God willed to establish the truth by His words and to cut off the root of the disbelievers, so that He might establish the truth and nullify falsehood, even though the guilty might dislike it. When you sought your sustainer's help, He responded to you, I will reinforce you with 1,000 angels, following one another. And God made this only as a message of glad tidings, so that your hearts might be at ease thereby. And victory is only from God. Indeed, God is almighty wise. When He covered you with drowsiness as a reassurance from Him, and sent down upon you water from the sky to purify you with it, to remove from you the impurity of Satan, to strengthen your hearts and make firm your feet. When your sustainer inspired the angels, I am with you. So strengthen those who believe. I will cast terror into the hearts of those who disbelieve. Strike above their necks and strike all their fingertips. Thus God returned the spoils entirely to himself and his messenger, so that the messenger of God, peace and blessings be upon him, might distribute them equally among the believers, after setting aside the fifth, whose uses would later be detailed. This ensured that the believing community would be free of all attachments to worldly gain, removing any cause for dispute and leaving the matter of distribution entirely in the hands of the messenger according to God's guidance. And thus did God present this parable of what they themselves desired for their own lives, and what God desired for them and with them, so that they would come to realize that the best choice is always that which God ordains, whether in matters of war gains or beyond them, for man knows only what lies before him, while the unseen remains concealed from his grasp. God presented to them this parable, drawn from their immediate reality, the very battlefield from which they were dividing the spoils of war. What was it that they desired for themselves in this matter? And what was it that God desired for them and through them? How vast is the gulf between what they wished for and what God willed for them! It is indeed a profound shift in reality, a leap far beyond the limits of perception and imagination. Even as your sustainer caused you to go forth from your home in the cause of truth, while a group among the believers were reluctant. They disputed with you concerning the truth after it had become clear, as though they were being driven towards death while they looked on. 8, 5, 6. And remember when God promised you that one of the two groups would fall to you, and you wished that the unarmed one might be yours, but God willed to establish the truth by his words, and to cut off the root of the disbelievers, so that he might cause the truth to triumph, and bring falsehood to nothing, even though the evildoers may detest it. 8, 7, 8. The return of the spoils of war to God and his messenger, their equal distribution among all, and the dislike of some believers for this fairness, just as they disliked before that some of the youth were allocated a larger share, this situation parallels another matter. The way in which God caused you to leave your home in truth to confront the enemy of great might, despite some of the believers disliking the very idea of battle. Yet before them lay the ultimate outcome, the result of which was these very spoils of war. We have already mentioned, in recounting the events of this battle as recorded in the books of biography, how Abu Bakr and Umar, may God be pleased with them, responded with wisdom when the messenger of God, peace and blessings be upon him, consulted the people regarding the question of battle. This occurred after the caravan had escaped, and it became clear that Quraysh had come forth with their full strength and might. Al-Miqdad ibn Amr stood and said, "O Messenger of God, proceed with what God has commanded you, for we are with you. By God, we will not say to you what the children of Israel said to their prophet, 'Go, you and your sustainer, and fight, we will remain here.' Rather, we shall say, 'Go, you and your sustainer, and fight, indeed we will fight alongside you.'" These were the words of the emigrants, Muhajirun. When the Prophet, peace be upon him, repeated his plea to the people, the helpers, Ansar, realized that he was addressing them. Sa'd ibn Mu'adh then stood and spoke at length, reassuring and decisive in his words. But what Abu Bakr, Umar, Al-Miqdad, and Sa'd ibn Mu'adh, may God be pleased with them, all said was not the sentiment of all who had set out from Medina with the messenger of God, peace and blessings be upon him. For there were those among them who disliked the idea of fighting and objected to it, as they had not prepared for battle. They had set out with the intention of intercepting the lightly defended caravan. But when they learned that Quraysh had come forth with their cavalry, infantry, champions and warriors, they felt a profound aversion to facing them. This aversion is vividly portrayed in the unique style of the Qur'an. Even as your sustainer caused you to go forth from your home in the cause of truth, while a group among the believers were reluctant. They disputed with you concerning the truth after it had become clear, as though they were being driven towards death while they looked on. 8, 5, 6. Al-Hafiz Abu Bakr ibn Mardawayh narrated in his tafsir with his chain of transmission on the authority of Abu Ayyub al-Ansari, who said, The messenger of God, peace and blessings be upon him, said to us while we were in Medina, I have been informed that Abu Sufyan's caravan is approaching. Would you like to go out to intercept it, so that perhaps God may grant you its spoils? We said yes. So we set out with him. After travelling for a day or two, he said to us, What do you think about engaging in battle with the enemy? They have been informed of your departure. We said, By God, we have no strength to fight the enemy. We only desired the caravan. He repeated, What do you think about engaging in battle with the enemy? And we repeated the same response. Then Al-Miqdad ibn Amr said, O Messenger of God, we will not say to you what the children of Israel said to Moses, Go you and your sustainer and fight, we will remain here. Rather we shall say, Go you and your sustainer and fight, indeed we will fight alongside you. We the Ansar wished that we had said what Al-Miqdad ibn Amr said, as we would have preferred it to possessing great wealth. Then God revealed to his messenger, Even as your sustainer caused you to go forth from your home in the cause of truth, while a group among the believers were reluctant. 8:5. This is what lingered in the hearts of a group of the believers that day, and this is why they disliked the idea of fighting. The Qur'an describes them as though they were being driven towards death while they looked on. This was after the truth had become clear, after they knew that God had promised them one of the two groups, and that there was no longer any choice left for them after one of the two groups the caravan had escaped. They now had to face the other group, as God had decreed it. Whether it was the caravan or the armed force, whether it was the weak group without strength or the powerful group with might and weaponry, the encounter was inevitable, as God had willed it. This was a moment in which the human soul was laid bare before the immediate threat of danger, revealing the impact of facing reality head-on despite the faith firmly rooted in the heart. The image painted by the Qur'an here is one that compels us to humble ourselves in understanding the demands of faith when confronted with the challenges of reality. We must neither overlook the limitations and vulnerabilities of the human soul, nor despair of ourselves or of humanity at large when we witness its tremors in the face of danger, even when the heart is assured of its faith. It is enough for the soul that it steadies itself thereafter, proceeds on the path, and confronts the danger in action, overcoming its initial hesitation. For these were the people of Badr, about whom the messenger of God, peace and blessings be upon him, said, What do you know? Perhaps God has looked upon the people of Badr and said, Do as you will, for I have forgiven you. And this is sufficient. Nevertheless, the Muslim group continued to hope that it would be the weaker, unarmed group that God would decree for them to meet. And remember when God promised you that one of the two groups would fall to you, and you wished that the unarmed one might be yours. 8:7. This is what the Muslim group wished for themselves that day. But what God willed for them, and through them, was something far greater. But God willed to establish the truth by his words, and to cut off the root of the disbelievers, so that he might cause the truth to triumph and bring falsehood to nothing, even though the evildoers may detest it. 8:7. God glorious is he, and his grace abundant willed that this event would not merely be about gain, but a decisive battle between truth and falsehood. God willed to establish the truth, to uproot falsehood, to vanquish the disbelievers, to humiliate their pride, to break their strength, to raise high the banner of Islam, and to exalt his word. He willed to grant victory to the small Muslim band who lived by his guidance and sought to establish his sovereignty on earth, demolishing the idols of tyranny. And he willed that this triumph would be earned, not given arbitrarily, for God is far above arbitrariness, but through effort, sacrifice, and the trials of struggle in the realm of reality and on the battlefield. Indeed, God willed that this small band of Muslims would become a nation, a state, a power, and a force. He willed that they would measure their strength against that of their enemies, and that their faith would outweigh the might of their foes. He willed that they would learn that victory is not in numbers, nor in wealth, nor in weaponry, but in the connection of their hearts to the boundless power of God. This truth could not become firmly rooted in their hearts as it did, except through this decisive encounter, a battle between the forces of faith and the forces of tyranny. And so, when one reflects today or in any time to come on the vast difference between what the Muslim group wished for themselves that day and what God willed for them, one comes to understand how humans err when they believe they can choose better for themselves than what God has chosen for them. They may resent what God wills for them, fearing harm or hardship, while behind it lies a good that surpasses their imagination. What was it that the Muslim group wished for themselves? A mere story of plunder, a tale of a group raiding a caravan and seizing its goods. But Badr became a story for all of history, a story of faith, a decisive victory, a criterion between truth and falsehood. It became a story of triumph for faith over an enemy well equipped and well prepared, while the truth stood with a small, poorly equipped group. It became a story of hearts victorious in their connection to God, overcoming their own weaknesses and fears. Even among them were those reluctant to fight, yet by the strength of their faith, they prevailed over their doubts, faced the battle, and overturned the balance of apparent power, so that the truth emerged triumphant, shining in its radiant glory. Indeed, the Battle of Badr, with all its circumstances and events, stands as an eternal example in the annals of human history. It establishes the eternal law of victory and defeat, unveiling the true causes behind triumph and failure, causes that are not confined to the material and apparent, but rather rooted in the unseen and the divine. Verily, it is an open book, meant to be read by all generations in every time and every place, its meanings unchanging, its essence immutable. For it is a sign from among the signs of God, and a manifestation of his eternal laws at work in creation, as long as the heavens and the earth endure. And indeed, the Muslim group striving today to rekindle the light of Islam upon the earth, after it has been overshadowed by the darkness of Jahiliyyah, is most deserving of pausing to reflect deeply on the values of Badr, its decisive principles, and the immense dimensions it unveils. These dimensions extend beyond what people desire for themselves to encompass what God wills for them. And remember when God promised you one of the two groups, saying that it would be yours, and you wished for the one without strength to be yours. But God willed to establish the truth by his words, and to cut off the roots of the disbelievers, so that he might establish the truth and abolish falsehood, even though the guilty might detest it. The Muslim group that seeks to re-establish this religion in the worldly realm, making it a living reality, may not necessarily find itself today at the same stage of development as the first Muslim group at the time of Badr. Yet the principles, values, and overarching guidance of Badr, its circumstances, results, and Quranic commentary remain ever relevant and ever guiding. They continue to confront and direct the Muslim group at every stage of its struggle, for these principles are universal and eternal, enduring as long as the heavens and the earth, whenever a band of believers rises to struggle against Jahiliyyah to revive the Islamic way of life. The Quranic narrative then moves on to evoke the atmosphere of the battle, its circumstances and its moments. It reveals how the believers stood, how God planned for them, and how victory was entirely the result of God's divine orchestration. The unique Quranic expression brings the scene to life in vivid detail, its events, its emotions, its trembling pulses, allowing the believers to relive it once more, but now in the illuminating light of divine guidance. Thus, they come to see its true dimensions, which transcend Badr itself, the Arabian Peninsula, and even the world, stretching across the entire cosmos and encompassing the higher realms of existence. These dimensions extend beyond the day of Badr, beyond the history of Arabia, and beyond the history of humanity on earth, reaching into the hereafter, where the final reckoning and ultimate reward take place. Through this lens, the Muslim group is made to feel its worth in the divine balance, the value of its actions, its striving for this religion, and its lofty rank in the sight of God. When you called upon your sustainer for help, he responded to you, "I will reinforce you with 1,000 angels following one another." And God made this only as a glad tiding to reassure your hearts. And victory is only from God. Verily, God is almighty, wise. When he caused drowsiness to overcome you as a reassurance from him and sent down upon you water from the sky to purify you, to remove from you the whisperings of Satan, to strengthen your hearts and to steady your steps. When your sustainer inspired the angels, saying, I am with you, so strengthen those who have believed. I will cast terror into the hearts of those who disbelieve. So strike above their necks and strike off every fingertip of theirs. That is because they opposed God and his messenger. And whoever opposes God and his messenger, then indeed God is severe in punishment. This is yours, so taste it, and know that for the disbelievers is the punishment of the fire. The entire battle was orchestrated by God's command, will, and decree. It unfolded under the guidance of his hosts and according to his direction, as though the movements, the moments, and the very breaths of the battle were all unfolding before our eyes through the living, dynamic, and evocative expressions of the Qur'an, making the past feel as though it is happening now. As for the story of the believer's plea for divine help, it is narrated by Imam Ahmad through the chain of narration from ID, from Mu'a ibn Rafij al-Zuraki, from his father, who was one of the people of Badr, who said, Gabriel came to the Prophet, peace and blessings be upon him, and said, How do you regard the people of Badr among you? The Prophet replied, They are the best of Muslims, or something similar. Gabriel said, And so are the angels who witnessed Badr. This narration is unique to Al-Bukhari. When you called upon your sustainer for help, he responded to you, I will reinforce you with 1,000 angels following one another. And God made this only as a glad tiding to reassure your hearts. And victory is only from God. Verily God is almighty wise. God responded to their plea when they called upon him, informing them that he would support them with 1,000 angels following one another. And while this was a matter of immense significance, illustrating the value of this small band of believers and the worth of this religion in God's sight, he did not allow the Muslims to mistakenly believe that there was any causal link between this support and the victory itself. Rather, he returned the matter entirely to himself exalted, be he thus correcting the believers' understanding and faith. This response, this reinforcement, and this announcement were all merely glad tidings to reassure their hearts. As for victory, it was solely from God, and it could only come from him. This is the essential creed established by the Quranic narrative here, so that the heart of the believer clings to no cause other than God himself. It was enough for the believers to exert themselves to their utmost capacity, leaving nothing behind, and to overcome the initial fear that struck some of them when faced with the tangible danger. It was enough for them to proceed in obedience to God's command, trusting in his promise of victory. Beyond this, all else was merely to reassure them, to strengthen their hearts, and to steady them in the face of peril. And indeed, it suffices for the believers to know that God's hosts are with them, so that their hearts may find tranquility and their resolve may be firm in the battle. Then the victory comes from God alone, for none but he holds the power to grant victory. He is the Almighty, the All-Wise, who places every matter in its proper place. When he caused drowsiness to overcome you as a reassurance from him, and sent down upon you water from the skies to purify you thereby, and remove from you the defilement of Satan, and to fortify your hearts and make firm your feet. Thus is described the wondrous moment of tranquility that enveloped the believers before the battle, a moment that can only be understood as a manifestation of God's will, his decree, and his subtle planning. The Muslims, overcome with fear at their small numbers in the face of imminent danger, a danger for which they were unprepared and ill-equipped, suddenly found themselves overtaken by drowsiness. And when they awoke, their hearts were filled with serenity, their souls immersed in calm, and their minds suffused with a profound reassurance. This same phenomenon of fear, followed by drowsiness and then tranquility, was repeated on the day of Uhud. Time and again terror would grip their hearts, only to be followed by this divine gift of drowsiness and the ensuing peace that settled upon their beings. I had often read these verses and reflected on this drowsiness as an event that took place, a mystery known only to God, recounted to us in his revelation. But then came a day when I myself was overtaken by hardship, a moment of silent, suffocating distress and anxious foreboding as the sun dipped below the horizon. In that hour, I, too, was overcome by a brief slumber lasting but a few moments. And when I awoke, I felt like a new person, a transformation I could neither explain nor comprehend. My soul was at peace, my heart was tranquil, and I was immersed in a deep and confident assurance. How did this happen? How did such a sudden transformation occur? I do not know, but in that moment I understood the story of Badr and Uhud, not merely with my intellect, but with the entirety of my being. I felt it alive within me, not merely as an imagined scene, but as a tangible reality. I could perceive the invisible hand of God at work, performing its subtle, direct action, and my heart found rest in that awareness. Indeed, this drowsiness and the ensuing tranquility were a part of God's aid to the small band of Muslims on the day of Badr, when he caused drowsiness to overcome you as a reassurance from him. The very words chosen caused drowsiness to overcome you. Drowsiness and reassurance all combine to cast a delicate, shimmering light over the scene. They paint a vivid picture of the state of the believers on that day, highlighting the profound significance of this psychological moment that marked the transition from one state to another. And then there is the story of the water. And sent down upon you water from the skies to purify you thereby, and remove from you the defilement of Satan, and to fortify your hearts and make firm your feet. This, too, was another form of divine aid bestowed upon the small band of believers before the battle. It is narrated by Ali ibn Talha from Ibn Abbas that when the Prophet, peace and blessings be upon him, marched toward Badr, the disbelievers had taken control of the water sources, leaving the Muslims to camp on a sandy plain far from any water. The Muslims were greatly weakened by thirst, and Satan began to whisper into their hearts, "You claim to be the allies of God and that his messenger is among you, yet here you are parched and exhausted, while your enemies have control of the water, and you are performing your prayers in a state of ritual impurity." Then God sent down upon them a heavy rain. The Muslims drank from it, purified themselves, and God removed from their hearts the defilement of Satan. The rain also caused the sandy ground beneath them to become firm, so that they and their mounts could traverse it with ease. They advanced with renewed strength toward the enemy, and God supported his prophet, peace and blessings be upon him, with 1,000 angels. Gabriel led 500 on one flank, and Michael led 500 on the other. This event took place before the Prophet, peace and blessings be upon him, implemented the wise suggestion of Al-Hubab ibn al-Mundir to camp at the nearest water source and block off all others. Al-Hubab had approached the Prophet and asked, "O Messenger of God, is this place where you have camped one that God himself has commanded us to remain, or is it a position chosen for the purposes of strategy and war?" The Prophet responded, "It is for strategy and war." Al-Hubab then said, "This is not the ideal position. Let us move to the nearest water source closer to the enemy, block off all other wells behind it, and fill the reservoirs so that we may drink and deny the enemy access to water." The Prophet accepted this advice and acted upon it. Thus, on that fateful night before the advice of Al-Hubab was carried out, this state of divine aid unfolded, as described in the Qur'an. It was a dual form of aid, physical and spiritual. Water in the harsh desert is the very essence of life, and in this case, it also became a means to victory. An army deprived of water in the desert loses its resolve long before it loses the battle. And then there was the psychological state that Satan exploited the unease of performing prayer without ritual purification due to the lack of water. It should be noted that the concession of dry ablution, or tayammum, was only granted later during the expedition against Banu al-Mustalik in the 5th year of Hijrah. Here, Satan sowed doubts and misgivings, entering through the gateway of faith itself to aggravate their distress and unsettle their hearts. A soul entering battle burdened with such doubts and anxiety does so already defeated from within. But then came the divine aid, the deliverance, and sent down upon you water from the skies to purify you thereby, and remove from you the defilement of Satan, and to fortify your hearts and make firm your feet. The spiritual aid was thus coupled with material assistance. The hearts found peace through purification, the spirits were reassured, and the ground beneath their feet became firm and stable. And this was further complemented by the divine inspiration to the angels. When your sustainer inspired the angels, "I am with you, so strengthen those who believe. I will cast terror into the hearts of those who disbelieve, strike above their necks, and strike off every fingertip of theirs." What a majestic decree! It is the divine presence itself that accompanies the angels in the battle, commanding them to strengthen the believers and to strike terror into the hearts of the disbelievers. This awe-inspiring reality should preoccupy us far more than idle questions about how the angels fought, how many they killed, or by what means they struck down the enemy. These are details beyond our grasp, for we know of the angels only what their Creator has chosen to reveal to us. We cannot fathom the precise nature of their actions, for such knowledge is rooted in the unseen. What matters is the grand truth of God's presence with the angels and their participation in the battle alongside the believers. This is the profound lesson to be drawn, that the striving of a small group of believers for the establishment of God's sovereignty on earth is an endeavour so immense and momentous that it calls forth the divine presence and the participation of his angels. And so the Qur'an concludes this momentous narrative with a reminder of the ultimate reality that transcends the battlefield. That is because they opposed God and his messenger. And whoever opposes God and his messenger, verily, God is severe in punishment. It was no mere coincidence, no chance encounter, that led to the victory of the believers and the terror that overtook their enemies. It was a manifestation of an eternal law that whoever opposes God and his messenger, seeking to hinder his path and obstruct his way of life, shall be met with divine retribution. The divine aid, the angels, the terror, and the victory all flowed from this immutable law. And so long as the believers remain steadfast, place their trust solely in their sustainer, and dedicate themselves to his cause, they shall continue to find strength, victory, and reassurance in his promise. But as for those who oppose God and his messenger, let them know that what they face in this world, the terror, the defeat, the strikes upon their necks and fingertips, is but a prelude to what awaits them in the hereafter. Taste this punishment now, and know that for the disbelievers is the torment of the fire. Thus God reminds the believers of his hand in all things, how he brought forth his messenger in truth, not out of pride, aggression, or tyranny, how he chose for them their destiny at Bada, how he supported them with angels and caused drowsiness to overcome them, how he sent down water and purified them, and how he cast terror into the hearts of their enemies. Indeed, it is he who granted them the spoils of war and provided for them out of his bounty, even though they had set out with neither wealth nor mounts nor provisions. Now that the Quranic discourse has revisited all of this, bringing it alive before their hearts and placing it vividly before their eyes, it presents a scene of decisive victory. A victory that does not depend on human planning, nor on the strength of numbers or equipment. Rather, it rests solely on the design, decree, and aid of God, and on reliance upon him alone. Seeking his help, calling out to him, and walking in accordance with his decree and plan. Now, with this scene firmly present in their hearts and vividly before their eyes now, at the most suitable moment for hearts to respond to instruction, comes the command to the believers, by virtue of their faith, to stand firm when they face those who disbelieve. They are not to turn their backs in retreat or flee in fear, for victory or defeat is determined by a will higher than human will, and by causes far removed from the visible factors that people perceive. Since it is God who directs the course of battle as he directs all matters, and it is he who strikes down the disbelievers through the hands of the believers, and he who brings success to their arrows when they are cast, the believers are but a veil for his power. He wills to grant them the reward of striving and enduring in his cause. It is he who casts fear into the hearts of the disbelievers, who weakens their plans, and who causes them to taste punishment both in this world and the next, for they have opposed God and his messenger. O you who have attained to faith, when you meet those who disbelieve advancing in battle, do not turn your backs to them. And whoever turns his back to them on that day, unless it be a tactical maneuver in battle or to join another group of believers, has incurred the wrath of God, and his abode shall be hell. What an evil destination. You did not slay them, but it was God who slew them. And you did not throw when you threw, but it was God who threw, so that he might confer upon the believers a great favour from himself. Verily, God is all-hearing, all-knowing. This is so, and know that God will weaken the schemes of the disbelievers. The Quranic expression here conveys a stern warning, coupled with a grave threat of God's wrath and the punishment of hell for those who flee. O you who have attained to faith, when you meet those who disbelieve advancing in battle, do not turn your backs to them. And whoever turns his back to them on that day, unless it be a tactical maneuver in battle or to join another group of believers, has incurred the wrath of God, and his abode shall be hell. What an evil destination. The meaning here is clear. O you who believe, when you face those who disbelieve in open battle advancing toward you, with both sides drawing nearer and confronting one another, do not flee from them. The only exceptions to this are if you retreat as part of a stratagem, seeking a better position, or employing a more effective plan, or if you withdraw to join another group of Muslims or a base of operations from which you can return to the fight. But whoever turns his back in flight, giving the enemy the advantage on the battlefield, has earned this severe punishment, God's wrath, and an abode in hell. Some opinions suggest that this ruling applied specifically to the Battle of Badr, or to battles where the Prophet, peace and blessings be upon him, was present. However, the majority of scholars hold that it is a general ruling, and that fleeing from the battlefield is one of the 7 grievous sins. It is narrated in the Sahihain of Al-Bukhari and Muslim from Abu Huraira, may God be pleased with him, that the Messenger of God, peace and blessings be upon him, said, "Avoid the 7 destructive sins." It was asked, "O Messenger of God, what are they?" He replied, "Associating partners with God, practicing sorcery, unjustly killing a soul that God has made sacred, consuming usury, devouring the wealth of orphans, fleeing from the battlefield, and falsely accusing chaste, unaware, believing women." Al-Jassas in Ahkam al-Qur'an provides a detailed explanation worth noting. He writes, God says, "And whoever turns his back to them on that day, unless it be a tactical maneuver in battle or to join another group of believers." Abu Nadra narrated from Abu Sa'id that this ruling applied specifically to the day of Badr. Abu Nadra justified this by saying that had they retreated that day, they would have fallen into the ranks of the disbelievers, for there were no other Muslims besides them at that time. However, this view is flawed. There were many Muslims in Medina, particularly among the Ansar, who had not joined the Prophet, peace and blessings be upon him, on that expedition, as they did not anticipate a confrontation. They believed it was merely a mission to intercept the caravan. Thus the Prophet set out with a small group of companions who were readily available. Abu Nadra's assertion that no Muslims other than the participants of Badr existed at the time, and that retreating would have meant joining the disbelievers, is inaccurate for these reasons. It has also been said that retreat was impermissible on that day because the Muslims were in the company of the Prophet, peace and blessings be upon him, and it was not permissible to abandon him. God says, "It is not fitting for the people of Medina and the Bedouins around them to stay behind when God's messenger goes to battle, nor to prefer their own lives over his." Thus it was their duty not to abandon him, nor to leave him vulnerable, even though God had guaranteed his protection and victory for the Prophet, as God says, "And God will protect you from the people." This was an obligation upon them, regardless of whether their enemies were few or many. Furthermore, the Prophet, peace and blessings be upon him, was their group on that day, and anyone retreating from the battlefield would have had to join him. Ibn Umar narrated, "I was with the army when the people fled in all directions, and we returned to Medina saying, 'We are the ones who fled.' But the Prophet, peace and blessings be upon him, said, 'No, I am your group.' Thus, for those who were with the Prophet on the battlefield, there was no other group to which they could retreat, and fleeing was not permissible. Al-Hasan said regarding the verse, "And whoever turns his back to them on that day, This was a specific ruling for the people of Badr. God also says, "Indeed, those of you who turned back on the day the two armies met, it was Satan who caused them to slip because of some of what they had earned." This refers to those who fled from the Prophet, peace and blessings be upon him, on the battlefield. Similarly, during the Battle of Hunain, many fled, and God reprimanded them for this. On the day of Hunain, when your great numbers delighted you, but they availed you nothing, and the earth, vast as it is, was constrained for you. Then you turned back, retreating. Such was the ruling when they were in the company of the Prophet, peace and blessings be upon him, whether their enemies were few or many. As for other battles, where the Prophet was not present, God initially commanded, "If there are 20 steadfast among you, they will overcome 200, and if there are 100, they will overcome 1,000 of those who disbelieve." This was the obligation at the time, but later God lightened the burden, saying, "Now God has lightened your burden, for he knows that there is weakness among you. So if there are 100 steadfast among you, they will overcome 200, and if there are 1,000, they will overcome 2,000 by God's permission." Ibn Abbas explained, "Initially it was decreed that one Muslim should not flee from 10 disbelievers. Later, God reduced this to fleeing only if the enemy outnumbered the Muslims by more than double. Thus, retreating from the battlefield remains one of the gravest sins unless done tactically or to regroup with other believers. As the Prophet, peace and blessings be upon him, said, "I am the group faction for every Muslim." When Abu Ubaidah ibn Masud fought to the death in battle instead of retreating, Umar ibn al-Khattab remarked, "May God have mercy on Abu Ubaidah. Had he retreated to me, I would have been his group." When the companions of Abu Ubaid returned to him, he said, "I am your refuge," without rebuking them. This ruling, according to our school of thought, that is, the Hanafi school, remains valid so long as the Muslim army does not reach the number of 12,000. In such a case, it is not permissible for them to flee from an enemy of equal strength unless they do so as a stratagem of war, such as shifting from one position to another to deceive their enemy, or for a similar reason that does not entail abandoning the battlefield altogether. Alternatively, they may retreat to regroup with another contingent of Muslims who are engaged in the fight. However, if their number reaches 12,000, Muhammad ibn al-Hassan has stated that they are not permitted to retreat from their enemy, regardless of how numerous the opposing force may be. He mentioned no disagreement among our scholars, the Hanafis, on this matter, and substantiated his view with the hadith narrated by al-Zuri on the authority of Ubayd God ibn Abdullah, wherein Ibn Abbas said, "The Messenger of God, peace and blessings be upon him, said, 'The best number for companions is 4. The best number for a detachment is 400. The best number for an army is 4,000, and 12,000 shall never be vanquished due to being too few.'" In some narrations it is reported, "No people numbering 12,000 can be defeated if they remain united." Al-Tahawi also narrated that Malik was asked, "Is it permissible for us to refrain from fighting those who abandon the rulings of God and judge by other than them?" Malik replied, "If there are 12,000 like you with you, then it is not permissible for you to refrain. Otherwise you are free to abstain." The questioner was Abdullah ibn Umar ibn Abdul Aziz ibn Abdullah ibn Umar. Malik's opinion aligns with what Muhammad ibn al-Hassan mentioned. The narration concerning 12,000 from the Prophet, peace and blessings be upon him, forms the basis for this ruling. Even if the disbelievers' numbers are many times greater, it is impermissible for the Muslims to flee, as long as the condition mentioned in the hadith, "if they remain united," is fulfilled. The Prophet thereby made it incumbent upon them to uphold their unity. Ibn al-Arabi, in his work Ahkam al-Qur'an, commented on the differing opinions regarding the applicability of this ruling, saying, "There is a divergence among scholars as to whether the prohibition of fleeing on the day of battle is specific to the Battle of Badr or applies to all battles until the Day of Judgment." Abu Sa'id al-Khudri narrated that it was specific to Badr, as the Muslims had no refuge that day except the Messenger of God. This was also the opinion of Nafi, al-Hasan, Qatada, Yazid ibn Habib, and al-Dahak. However, it has been narrated from Ibn Abbas and the majority of scholars that the verse remains applicable until the end of time. Only a minority adhered to the view that it was restricted to Badr based on the words, "and whoever turns his back on that day," which some assumed referred specifically to Badr. However, this is not the case. Rather, it refers to the day of battle in general. The evidence lies in the fact that the verse was revealed after the fighting had taken place, when the battle was over, and the day had passed with all its events. Moreover, it is authentically reported that the Prophet, peace and blessings be upon him, counted fleeing on the day of battle among the major sins. This is explicit and resolves the issue, clarifying the ruling. We have also pointed out the nuance that led some to mistakenly assume it was specific to Badr. We align ourselves with the view expressed by Ibn al-Arabi, which reflects the opinion of Ibn Abbas and the majority of scholars. The prohibition of retreating on the day of battle must be understood in its unrestricted sense, as it carries significant implications both for the practical dynamics of war and for the very essence of faith. The heart of a believer ought to be steadfast and unshaken, impervious to any earthly force while remaining firmly linked to the omnipotent power of God, who dominates over all affairs and reigns supreme over his servants. If, in the face of danger, such a heart trembles, it must not allow this tremor to escalate into defeat or retreat. Life and death are in God's hands, and thus a believer cannot flee for fear of losing his life. This is no imposition beyond human capacity, for the believer faces his enemy as one human facing another. On this level they stand as equals. Yet, the believer is distinguished by his connection to the supreme power that none can overcome. Whether he lives or dies, he belongs to God. If death is decreed for him, it is martyrdom in God's cause. Thus, in every circumstance, he is stronger than his adversary, who stands in opposition to God and his messenger. This is the decisive ruling, and whoever turns his back on that day, unless maneuvering for battle or withdrawing to join another group, has indeed incurred the wrath of God, and his abode is hell, and wretched is the destination. Here we must pause to reflect on the profound imagery of the Quranic expression. Do not turn your backs to them, and whoever turns his back on that day. It is a vivid depiction of retreat in its most humiliating and disgraceful form, evoking the act of showing one's back to the enemy with all its connotations of shame and cowardice. The verse continues, "He has incurred the wrath of God." Not only is the defeated one fleeing, but he carries with him the wrath of God to his ultimate abode, hell, a most wretched destination. In this way, the Quranic language intertwines its imagery with its message, creating an atmosphere that evokes a strong sense of abhorrence and condemnation for retreating on the day of battle. The narrative then shifts from this stern warning against retreat to reveal the hand of God orchestrating the battle behind the scenes, defeating the enemy for the believers and granting them victory. The believers, meanwhile, are rewarded for their perseverance, as God intends to bestow upon them his favour through their steadfastness and sacrifice. It was not you who killed them, but it was God who killed them. And you did not throw when you threw, but it was God who threw, so that he might test the believers with a fair trial from himself. Indeed, God is all-hearing, all-knowing. Traditions recount that this refers to the handful of dust which the Prophet, peace and blessings be upon him, cast into the faces of the disbelievers, saying, "May their faces be disfigured." It struck the faces of those whom God had decreed to be killed. Yet the broader meaning of the verse transcends this specific incident. It illustrates God's divine orchestration of the entire affair, how he guided the Prophet and the Muslim community in their visible actions, while his unseen power was at work behind it all. This is further emphasized by the subsequent verse, "and so that he might bestow upon the believers a fair trial from himself." That is, that he may grant them the honor of performing deeds of valor and sacrifice, for which he will reward them abundantly after granting them victory. Thus they are doubly blessed, first with triumph, and then with recompense. Indeed, God is all-hearing, all-knowing. He hears your supplications, knows your condition, and makes you an instrument of his decree when he finds sincerity in your hearts. He grants you victory and reward, as he did for you at Badr. This, and that God will weaken the stratagem of the disbelievers. This is yet another favor from God beyond the first. Not only does he vanquish your enemies by your hands, and not only does he weaken them with the prophet's gesture, but he also undermines their plans and reduces their strength. Thus, there is no room for fear, no room for defeat, and no justification for the believers to turn their backs on the disbelievers. The narrative then connects this divine promise with the broader circumstances of the battle. Since it is God who killed the disbelievers, hurled dust at them, and granted the believers their noble trial, and since he weakened the designs of the disbelievers, then what cause is there for dispute over the spoils of war, given that the entire battle was conducted under God's guidance? The believers were merely instruments of his will. What claim can they make over that which was determined solely by his decree? And when the discourse reaches the point of affirming that God is the one who weakens the schemes of the disbelievers, it turns to address those very disbelievers, those who, before the battle, had arrogantly invoked God, asking him to grant victory to the more upright of the two parties and to punish the more wicked and the one most severed from kinship bonds. Such was the supplication of Abu Jahl, his invocation, in essence asking for judgment from God and a decisive verdict. And so the verdict came, and the circle of defeat turned upon the disbelievers. The address now turns to them in a tone of divine irony, mocking their plea and affirming that what happened at Badr was not a mere anomaly, nor a fleeting event, but a manifestation of an enduring law of existence. Their numbers, their multitudes would never alter this divine decree, for it is the eternal law of God to stand with the believers. If you sought victory, then victory has come to you. But if you desist, it is better for you. And if you return to battle, we too shall return. And your multitudes will avail you nothing, even if they are many, for God is with the believers. If you sought judgment, praying that God might decide between you and the Muslims, and destroy the more wicked and severed from kinship, then God has answered. He has decreed defeat upon you, turning the circle of calamity upon the more wicked and severed of the two groups. Surely you know, if you are willing to reflect, who is the more wicked of the two parties and who is more severed from kinship bonds. In light of this truth and this divine indication, God urges them to abandon their state of disbelief, idolatry, and hostility toward the Muslims. He calls them to desist from their enmity toward God and his messenger. But if you desist, it is better for you. Yet alongside this encouragement comes a warning. And if you return, we too shall return. The outcome is already known. No gathering of forces, no swelling of numbers will alter the divine decree, and your multitudes will avail you nothing, even if they are many. For what can numbers achieve when God himself is on the side of the believers? And God is with the believers. Thus, the battle in this light is never an equal contest. For the believers who stand with God are arrayed on one side, while the disbelievers who have none but other mortals like themselves stand on the other. The course of such a battle is foreordained. Indeed, the Arab polytheists themselves were not ignorant of this truth. Their knowledge of God was neither shallow nor vague, as some may mistakenly assume when influenced by certain historical generalizations. The idolatry of the Arabs was not rooted in a denial of God's existence or jahiliyyah of his reality. Rather, it stemmed primarily from their refusal to dedicate their worship and submission to him alone, particularly in their acceptance of laws and systems of life derived from sources other than him. This refusal stood in stark contradiction to their acknowledgement of God's divinity and their awareness of his ultimate sovereignty. As we find in the accounts of the battle from the books of Siyarah, when Kifaf ibn Imar ibn Rada al-Ghifari, or perhaps it was his father, Imar ibn Rada al-Ghifari, sent his son to Quraysh as they passed by him, offering sacrificial camels as a gift and saying, "If you wish, we will also supply you with weapons and men." They responded to him, sending back a message with his son. "You have fulfilled your duty of kinship. By God, if we are fighting men, we are not too weak to face them. But if we are fighting God, as Muhammad claims, then none has the power to stand against God." Similarly, we have the statement of Al-Aqnas ibn Shuraik to the tribe of Banu Zurah, a polytheist addressing other polytheists, saying, O Banu Zurah, God has saved your wealth for you and delivered to you your kinsman, Makramah ibn Naufal. And we have the invocation of Abu Jahl himself, whom the Prophet, peace and blessings be upon him, described as the Pharaoh of this nation, as he said, O God, sever the one most severed from kinship bonds among us, and bring upon us what we do not know. Destroy him utterly this very morning. Similarly, when Hakim ibn Hizam came to him as a messenger from Utbah ibn Rabi'ah, urging him to turn back from the fight, Abu Jahl replied, By God, we shall not turn back until God has decided between us and Muhammad. Such was their awareness of the divine reality, and their consciousness of its presence in every situation. Their error was not in failing to know God or in denying his power, far from it. They knew well that none could withstand God, that he alone decides the outcomes of all matters, and that no one can overturn his decrees. Their true idolatry lay in their refusal to derive their way of life and laws from him alone, despite their acknowledgement of his divinity. This was the same idolatry that persists today among those who imagine themselves to be Muslims followers of Muhammad, peace and blessings be upon him, just as the Arab polytheists imagined themselves to be followers of their forefather Ibrahim, peace be upon him. Even Abu Jahl, yes, Abu Jahl himself invoked God, saying, O God, sever the one most severed from kinship bonds among us, and bring upon us what we do not know. Destroy him utterly this very morning. As for the idols they were known to worship, they never viewed them as possessing divinity comparable to that of God. The Qur'an itself clarifies their belief regarding these idols and the reason they dedicated acts of worship to them. And those who take protectors besides God say, We do not worship them except to bring us closer to God in rank. Qur'an 39:3. Thus, their perception of the idols was merely as intermediaries, intercessors before God. Their true idolatry did not stem from this belief, nor was the Islam of those who accepted the message of the Prophet, peace and blessings be upon him, limited to abandoning such intercessors. Otherwise, the Hanifs, those who abstained from idol worship and dedicated their acts of worship to God alone, would have been considered Muslims. But Islam is more than belief and acts of worship. It is the exclusive acknowledgement of God's sovereignty in lawmaking and governance. Those who fail to single out God alone for such sovereignty, whether in the past or present, are idolaters. They are not absolved of this idolatry by merely professing the belief that there is no God but God, nor by dedicating acts of worship solely to him. For this would leave them no different from the Hanifs, who were never regarded as Muslims. People become Muslims only when they complete the chain of faith, when they combine belief and worship with the exclusive acknowledgement of God's sovereignty, rejecting any law, system or value not derived from him alone. This and this alone is Islam, as defined by the testimony of faith. There is no God but God, and Muhammad is the messenger of God. This testimony, in its full meaning and implications, has been understood throughout the history of Islamic thought and practice. Moreover, those who bear this testimony must come together in a dynamic movement under Muslim leadership, severing their ties with the pagan societal order and its leadership. This is the starting point for anyone who seeks to be truly Muslim. They must not be deluded into thinking they are Muslims merely by holding beliefs and performing acts of worship, for this alone does not suffice. Unless they single out God alone for sovereignty, reject the authority of man-made systems, and disavow their allegiance to the pagan societal order and its leadership, they cannot be true Muslims. Many sincere and well-meaning individuals are deceived by this illusion. They long to be Muslim, yet they are misled about the true nature of Islam. It would be better for them to realize what Islam truly entails, and to know that the Arab polytheists, who were openly called idolaters, did not differ from them in any fundamental way. For the polytheists, too, acknowledged God's reality, offered acts of worship to him through intercessors, and knew full well that none could stand against his will. Their fundamental idolatry lay in their refusal to accept God's sovereignty over their lives. If these sincere individuals wish to be Muslim, they must understand this reality clearly and deeply. And if the Muslim community striving to revive Islam in the world wishes to succeed, it must grasp this truth firmly, without hesitation or ambiguity. It must convey this understanding to others with clarity and resolve, for this is the starting point of the journey. If the movement deviates even slightly from this foundation at the outset, it will lose its way entirely, no matter how sincere or determined it may be thereafter. The discourse then returns to address the believers directly, calling them repeatedly to obedience to God and His Messenger. They are warned against turning away from this path, or imitating those who hear God's revelations recited to them as though they do not hear, those who are deaf and dumb, despite having ears to hear and tongues to speak. Such individuals are described as the worst of creatures on earth, for they fail to heed the guidance offered to them. O you who have attained to faith, obey God and His Messenger, and do not turn away from Him while you hear His call. And be not like those who say, "We have heard, but they do not hear." Indeed, the worst of creatures in the sight of God are the deaf and dumb who do not understand. If God had known of any good in them, He would have certainly made them hear. But even if He had made them hear, they would have turned away in aversion. This call is directed to the believers, urging them to obey God and His Messenger, not to turn away while they are in the presence of His verses and words. This call comes after all the preceding indications that signify its necessity, following a review of the events of battle after witnessing God's hand in it, His planning, His decree, His aid, and His support. It is also affirmed that God is with the believers and that He weakens the schemes of the disbelievers. After all this, there remains no room for anything but hearing and obeying God and His Messenger. To turn away from the Messenger and His commands after all this appears to be an objectionable and ugly act that no one with a heart capable of reflection and a mind capable of thought would dare to commit. From here arises the mention of the creatures in their appropriate context. The term creatures encompasses humanity as well. They tread upon the earth. However, its frequent use refers to livestock casting a shadow upon the deaf and dumb who do not understand, clothing them in the image of the brute in both perception and imagination. Indeed, they are such. They are creatures under this shadow. They are indeed the worst of creatures. For beasts have ears, yet they hear only vague sounds. They have tongues, yet they utter no comprehensible words. Nevertheless, animals are guided by their instincts regarding their vital needs. As for these creatures, they are relegated to their understanding, which they derive no benefit from. They are certainly the worst of creatures. Indeed, the worst of creatures in the sight of God are the deaf and dumb who do not understand. If God had known of any good in them, He would have certainly made them hear meaning. He would have opened their hearts to comprehend that which their ears may hear. However, He exalted is He did not know of any good in them, nor any desire for guidance. They have corrupted their innate readiness for reception and response. Thus, God has not opened to them that which they have closed off within their hearts, and that which they have corrupted of their nature. Even if God had allowed them to comprehend with their intellect the truth to which they are called, they would not have opened their hearts to it, nor responded to what they could understand. Even if He had made them hear, they would have turned away in aversion. For the intellect may comprehend, yet a veiled heart does not respond. Thus, even if He had made them hear with understanding, they would have turned away from responding, and the response is the true hearing. How many are those whose minds understand, yet their hearts are veiled and do not respond? Once again, the call is repeated to the believers, urging them to respond to God and His Messenger with encouragement to respond and a warning against turning away, reminding them of God's grace upon them when they responded to God and His Messenger. O you who have attained to faith, respond to God and His Messenger when He calls you to that which gives you life, and know that God intervenes between a person and his heart, and that to Him you shall be gathered. And beware of a trial that will not strike only those among you who have wronged, and know that God is severe in punishment. And remember, when you were but a few, weak in the land, fearing that people might abduct you, then He sheltered you and strengthened you with His support, and provided you with good things that you might be grateful. Indeed, the messenger of God, peace be upon him, calls them to that which gives them life. It is a call to life in all its forms and meanings. He calls them to a faith that revives hearts and minds, liberating them from the shackles of jahiliyyah and superstition, from the pressure of illusions and myths, from the humiliating subjugation to apparent causes and overwhelming necessities, and from servitude to anything other than God, whether it be to another human being or to desires. And he calls them to a divine law that declares the liberation of humanity, honouring it by deriving its essence from God alone, with all humans standing equally before it, without any individual dominating a community, nor any class over a nation, nor any race over another, nor any tribe over another. They all emerge as equals, free under the law of its creator, God, the sustainer of all. He calls them to a way of life, a way of thought, and a way of perception, liberating them from all constraints except for the limits of their innate nature, represented in the guidelines established by the creator of mankind, who knows what he has created. These guidelines preserve the constructive energy from dissipating, while neither stifling this energy, nor destroying it, nor preventing it from positive and constructive activity. And he calls them to strength, dignity, and elevation through their belief and their methodology, instilling confidence in their faith and in their sustainer, and urging them to traverse the earth to liberate humanity as a whole, extricating them from the servitude of servants to the servitude of God alone, thus achieving the higher humanity that God has bestowed upon them, which tyrants have usurped from them. He calls them to struggle in the cause of God, to establish the sovereignty of God on earth and in the lives of people, to dismantle the claimed divinity of the slaves, and to pursue those who infringe upon the sovereignty of God. Exalted is he, his authority and dominion, until they return to the sovereignty of God alone. And then the religion will be wholly for God, even if they meet death in this struggle. For them in martyrdom is life. This is a summary of what the messenger, peace be upon him, calls them to. It is a call to life in all its meanings. This religion is a complete way of life, not merely a concealed belief. It is a practical methodology wherein life flourishes and ascends under its shade. Thus, it is a call to life in all its forms and shapes, in all its realms and implications. The Quranic expression encapsulates all this in a few evocative words. O you who have attained to faith, respond to God and his messenger when he calls you to that which gives you life. Respond to him willingly and of your own accord. And though God exalted is, he has the power to compel you to follow the right path if he so wished. Know that God intervenes between a man and his heart. What a terrifying, awe-inspiring image of the subtle yet overwhelming power that intervenes between a man and his heart, separating him from his heart, seizing it and holding it captive, directing it as he wills, turning it as he desires, while its owner possesses nothing of it, this heart that beats within him. Indeed, it is a truly terrifying image. The heart perceives it in the Quranic text, yet human expression fails to capture the rhythm of this reality in the heart, or to describe this rhythm in the nerves and senses. It is an image that calls for perpetual vigilance, constant caution, and ongoing preparedness. Vigilance over the stirrings and beats of the heart, caution against every whisper within it and every inclination, lest it lead to a slip, and constant preparedness for pitfalls, whispers and temptations, and a continuous attachment to God exalted. Is he fearing that this heart may be turned in a moment of negligence or forgetfulness, or by a surge of impulses? The messenger of God, peace be upon him, who is the messenger of God, the infallible one, frequently prayed to his sustainer, O turner of hearts, stabilize my heart upon your religion. So how about the people, who are neither messengers nor infallible? This is a vision that truly shakes the heart. The believer feels a tremor within himself as he contemplates his heart, which beats within him in the grasp of the compeller, the mighty. He possesses nothing of it, even though he carries it within him and walks. This is the image presented to the believers as he calls them. O you who have attained to faith, respond to God and his messenger when he calls you to that which gives you life. To tell them that God is capable of compelling them to follow the right path, if he so wished, and to the response he invites them to in this call. Yet he exalted is he honors them by inviting them to respond willingly so that they may earn the reward, and through their own will elevate their humanity to the level of the trust that God has entrusted to this being called humanity, the trust of chosen guidance, the trust of conscious stewardship, and the trust of deliberate will informed by knowledge. And to him you shall be gathered, for your hearts are in his hands, and after all that you will be gathered to him. There is no escape from him, neither in this world nor the hereafter. Yet, with this he calls you to respond as a free person who earns reward, not as a compelled servant. Then he warns them against abstaining from striving in God's cause, against turning away from the call to true life, and against hesitating to confront evil in any of its forms. And beware of a trial that will not strike only those who have committed wrongdoing among you exclusively, and know that God is severe in punishment. This trial is a test, a calamity, and a tribulation. A community that allows a group among them to commit acts of tyranny, whatever form that tyranny may take, and does not stand against the oppressors, nor block the path of the corruptors, is a community that deserves to be seized by the consequences of the wrongdoing and corruption within it. The gravest of oppressions is the rejection of God's divine law and his ordained way of life. Islam is a cooperative and proactive system that does not permit complacency in the face of tyranny, corruption, and wrongdoing spreading unchecked. Far more egregious than this is to witness the rejection of God's religion, to see the denial of his sovereignty, and to observe man-made deities usurping his rightful place and yet remain silent. And yet such people hope that God will deliver them from the trial because they believe themselves to be pious and virtuous. But since resisting tyranny entails sacrifices of life, wealth, and comfort, the Qur'an reminds the early Muslim community, which was the first to be addressed by this divine message, of their initial weakness, their small numbers, and the harm and fear they endured. It reminds them of how God sheltered them with his religion, strengthened them with his support, and provided them with abundant sustenance. Thus, they are urged not to turn away from the life to which the messenger of God is calling them, nor from the responsibilities of this life that God has honored them with, protected and bestowed upon them. And remember when you were few, oppressed on earth, fearing that people would snatch you away. But he sheltered you, strengthened you with his help, and provided for you out of the good things so that you might be grateful. Remember this so that you may be certain that the messenger is calling you to what truly gives you life. Remember so that you do not refrain from resisting tyranny in all its forms and manifestations. Recall the days of weakness and fear before God directed you to fight against the idolaters, before the messenger invited you to confront the powerful enemy, though you were reluctant. Then look at how you became, after embracing this life-giving call, a people honored, victorious, rewarded, and provided for. God grants you the good things of this world to prepare you to be grateful, and in your gratitude lies your reward. The Quranic expression paints a vivid image of their former state of weakness, anxiety, and fear, fearing that people would snatch you away. It is a scene of lurking dread, of tense anticipation, so vivid that one can almost see the frightened features, the anxious movements, the darting eyes, and the trembling hands reaching out in fear of being seized. From this harrowing vision of terror, the scene shifts to one of security, strength, victory, and abundant blessings within the protective shade of God's care. But he sheltered you, strengthened you with his help, and provided for you out of the good things. And under God's guidance they are reminded to be grateful so that they may earn his reward, so that you might be grateful. Who then could behold this vast transformation and not respond to the call of true life, the call of the noble and trustworthy messenger? And who could fail to thank God for his shelter, his help, and his blessings, with these two contrasting scenes laid out before them, each with its powerful resonance and profound implications? Indeed, the people themselves were living witnesses to this transformation. They were reminded of what they had personally experienced in their past and what they now saw in their present. Thus, the Quran had a deeply resonant flavor in their hearts. As for the Muslim community today, striving to re-establish this religion in the reality of the world and in the lives of humankind, It may not have passed through these two phases, nor tasted these two contrasting experiences, yet this Quran still calls out to it with this same truth. And if it finds itself today in the state described by God, when you were few, oppressed on earth, fearing that people would snatch you away, then it is all the more fitting for it to respond to the call to true life to which the messenger of God invites it. It must look forward in certainty and trust to God's promise to the Muslim community, a promise he fulfilled for the first generation of believers and has pledged to fulfill for every group that remains steadfast on his path and bears with patience its burdens. It must await the fulfillment of his words. But he sheltered you, strengthened you with his help, and provided for you out of the good things so that you might be grateful. For it is dealing with God's true promise, not with the deceptive appearances of worldly reality. God's promise is the true reality that outweighs all other realities. Once again, the Quran calls out to the believers, reminding them that wealth and children may hold them back from responding to God's call, either out of fear or miserliness. The life to which the messenger of God, peace and blessings be upon him, calls them is a noble life, but it demands sacrifices. It requires effort and selflessness. Thus, the Quran addresses this attachment to wealth and children by warning them of the trials they represent, as they are a means of testing and a source of tribulation. It cautions against failing this test, against neglecting the call to strive in God's cause, and against falling short in fulfilling the trust, covenant and pledge they have undertaken. This neglect is deemed a betrayal of God and his messenger, as well as a betrayal of the trusts the Muslim community has been charged with, namely upholding God's word, affirming his sole sovereignty, and serving as guardians of humanity by establishing justice and equity. Alongside this warning comes a reminder of the immense reward God holds in store, a reward that far outweighs the wealth and children that may hinder people from sacrifice and striving. O you who have attained to faith, do not betray God and the messenger, nor betray your trusts knowingly, and know that your wealth and your children are but a trial, and that with God lies an immense reward. Abandoning the responsibilities that the Muslim community has been entrusted with is a betrayal of God and his messenger. The foremost issue of this religion is the issue of there is no deity but God. Muhammad is the messenger of God. This entails affirming God's sole sovereignty exclusively, his both in belief and in practice. Throughout history, humanity has rarely denied God outright, but it has frequently associated partners with him, sometimes in worship and belief, but more often in governance and authority. This latter form of polytheism, associating others with God in ruling human affairs, has been the most prevalent. Thus, the primary mission of this religion is not merely to bring people to acknowledge God's existence, but to lead them to affirm his sole sovereignty, declaring that there is no deity but God, which means recognizing him alone as the ultimate authority in their worldly lives, just as they acknowledge his authority in the natural order. It also involves acknowledging that Muhammad, peace and blessings be upon him, is the sole conveyor of God's guidance, and that they must adhere to all that he conveys to them. This is the essence of this religion, to embed this conviction in the heart and to establish it as the foundation of life. Hence, abandoning this mission is a betrayal of God and his messenger. God warns the Muslim community, which has declared its faith and proclaimed this belief, not to forsake their struggle to realize its true implications in practice, nor to shirk the sacrifices required in terms of life, wealth and children. Similarly, they are warned against betraying the trust they assumed when they pledged allegiance to the messenger of God, peace and blessings be upon him, and embraced Islam. For Islam is not merely a word uttered by the tongue, nor is it merely ritualistic invocations. It is a comprehensive, all-encompassing way of life that encounters obstacles and hardships. It is a program for transforming the fabric of life, built on the foundation of there is no deity but God. This entails returning humanity to the worship of their true sustainer, bringing society under the governance of his law, and confronting the tyrants who arrogate to themselves the sovereignty and authority that rightfully belongs to God alone. It involves securing justice and equity for all people, establishing balance and fairness, cultivating the earth and shouldering the responsibilities of stewardship in accordance with God's guidance. All these are trusts. Failing to fulfill them is a betrayal of these trusts, a breach of the covenant made with God, and a violation of the pledge given to his messenger. And all of this requires sacrifice, patience, and endurance. It demands rising above the temptation of wealth and children, and fixing one's gaze on the great reward that lies with God, reserved for his faithful servants, those who remain steadfast, selfless, and willing to give of themselves, and know that your wealth and your children are but a trial, and that with God lies a great reward. This Quran addresses the human soul with the profound knowledge of its creator, he who knows its hidden depths, its outward manifestations, and the winding paths and byways of its inner workings. He exalted is he knows the points of weakness inherent in this human nature, and he knows that attachment to wealth and children is among the deepest of these vulnerabilities. Hence, he alerts mankind to the truth regarding the blessings of wealth and children, that God has granted them as a test, a trial, through which their faith and character are refined. These are part of the adornments of worldly life, meant as a means of examination, to see how his servants will act, whether they will show gratitude, fulfill the rights of these blessings, or allow themselves to become so immersed in them that they neglect their obligations toward God. And we test you with both evil and good as a trial. Thus, trials are not confined to hardship and deprivation. They also manifest in ease and abundance. Wealth and children, as symbols of prosperity, are themselves a means of testing. This is the first reminder. And know that your wealth and your children are but a trial. When the heart becomes aware of the nature of this test, it is better equipped to be vigilant, cautious, and prepared not to be overwhelmed, distracted, or fail in this trial. But God does not leave the human soul without assistance or compensation. For the burden may seem too heavy to bear, especially in this area of vulnerability involving wealth and children. Therefore, God offers the believer something far greater, something everlasting, to help them endure this trial and rise above it. And with God lies a great reward. Indeed, it is He, exalted is He who granted wealth and children in the first place. And it is with Him that there resides a reward far greater than these fleeting blessings. Thus, no one should abandon the responsibilities of trust or the sacrifices required in striving for his cause. This is the divine aid and support for the weak human soul whose Creator knows its frailties. And man was created weak. This is a comprehensive approach, a divine method of belief, perception, education, guidance, obligation, and responsibility. It is God's way, imbued with perfect knowledge, for He is the Creator. Shall He not know who created, when He is the subtle, the all-aware? The final call in this passage of the Surah is directed to the believers, summoning them to God consciousness, taqwa. For no heart can bear the heavy burdens of this path, except when it is illuminated by clarity of purpose, guided by divine light that dispels doubts, removes whispers of uncertainty, and steadies the feet upon this long and thorny road. This clarity, this discernment, comes only through the sensitivity of taqwa and the light of God's guidance. O you who have attained to faith, if you remain conscious of God, He will grant you a criterion to discern the true from the false, and will efface your bad deeds and forgive you. And God is limitless in His bounty. This is the provision, the sustenance for the journey ahead, the provision of taqwa, which enlivens hearts, awakens them, and stirs within them an alertness and caution. It is also the provision of divine light, which illuminates the path ahead, revealing its twists, turns, and pitfalls so the traveller is not blinded by doubts that obscure the clear vision of truth. Moreover, it is the provision of forgiveness, which instills serenity and peace within the soul, and the provision of hope in God's boundless grace, hope that sustains the believer on the day when all other provisions are exhausted and all deeds fall short. Indeed, it is a truth that God consciousness creates in the heart a discernment that reveals the curves of the path. But like every truth of faith, this can only be truly understood by those who have tasted its reality. No description can convey its essence to those who have not experienced it. Matters remain entangled in both perception and thought. The ways appear convoluted. Falsehood continues to masquerade as truth at the crossroads. Arguments may silence opposition, but they fail to convince. They may halt objections, but they do not move hearts or minds toward submission. Debate remains futile, and discussion becomes a wasted effort until taqwa enters the picture. When it does, the mind becomes enlightened, truth becomes clear, the path is unveiled, the heart is reassured, the conscience finds peace, and the feet are firmly planted on the way forward. Truth in and of itself is not hidden from the innate disposition of man, fitra. There is an inherent harmony between man's nature and the truth upon which the heavens and the earth were created. Yet it is base desires that obscure this harmony, spreading confusion, clouding vision, and concealing the path. Desires cannot be overcome by argument, only taqwa can dispel them. It is the fear of God, the consciousness of His presence both in private and public, that drives away these desires and brings forth discernment. This discernment is a priceless gift, yet God in His boundless grace adds to it the expiation of sins and the forgiveness of transgressions, and beyond all this He adds His limitless bounty. Indeed, this is the boundless generosity that only the most gracious, the sustainer of infinite grace, can bestow. And remember when those who were bent on denying the truth devised schemes against you, O Prophet, to restrain you, or to kill you, or to drive you away. Thus they schemed, and God too devised a scheme, and God is the best of schemers. 8:30. When our revelations are recited to them, they say, "We have heard this before. If we wished, we could say something like this. This is nothing but tales of the ancients." And when they say, "O God, if this be indeed the truth from you, then rain down upon us stones from the sky or inflict upon us a grievous suffering," they are reminded. But God would never chastise them while you are in their midst, nor will He punish them as long as they seek forgiveness. Yet what prevents them from being punished by God when they bar others from the sacred mosque, though they are not its rightful guardians? Its true guardians are none but the God-conscious, though most of them do not know this. Their prayer at the sacred house is nothing but whistling and clapping. Taste, then, the punishment for your denial of the truth. Indeed, those who deny the truth spend their wealth to turn others away from the path of God. They will continue to spend it, but it will become a cause of regret for them. Then they will be overcome. And those who deny the truth shall be gathered into hell. Thus God distinguishes the corrupt from the pure, piling the corrupt together until He casts them all into hell. Truly they are the losers. Say to those who deny the truth, if they desist, their past sins shall be forgiven them. But if they persist, then the fate of the earlier peoples has already been sealed. And so, fight them until there is no more oppression, and all worship is devoted to God alone. If they desist, surely God sees all that they do. But if they turn away, then know that God is your protector, an excellent protector and an excellent helper. The Quranic discourse moves seamlessly, juxtaposing the past with the present. It presents the Muslim community, which fought the battle and emerged victorious, with a vivid picture of the immense transformation between their past and their present. It reveals to them God's grace in His planning for them, a grace so immense that it dwarfs the spoils of war and renders sacrifices and hardships insignificant by comparison. In the previous section, the state of Muslims in Makkah before this battle was portrayed. They were few, weak, vulnerable and afraid that others might seize them. But now their condition has changed. They have found refuge, dignity and blessings through God's planning, care and grace. Here, the narrative shifts to depict the disbelievers' schemes against the Prophet, peace be upon him, before his migration. It describes their obstinate rejection of the divine signs, their claims that they could produce something similar if they so wished, and their arrogance, which led them to demand punishment instead of heeding the truth and seeking guidance. God describes how they spend their wealth to turn people away from His path and to prepare for war against His messenger. Yet He promises them nothing but failure and regret in this world, and on the day of resurrection they will be herded to hell, a loss both in this life and the next, a bitter fruit of their schemes, hoarding and plotting. In the end, God commands his prophet to confront the disbelievers and offer them a choice between two paths: to abandon their disbelief, obstinacy, and war against God and his messenger, and thereby have their previous transgressions forgiven, or to persist in their current ways and face the same fate as those who came before them, punished according to God's unchanging decree. Then God commands the believers to fight them until disbelief no longer holds sway, where the disbelievers can no longer tempt the Muslims or persecute them for their faith. The ultimate aim is that God's sovereignty alone is established on earth, so that all religion belongs to God. If they then declare their submission and accept this truth, the prophet shall accept it from them, leaving the judgment of their intentions to God, for he alone knows what is in their hearts. But if they turn away, persisting in their hostility and refusal to recognize God's sovereignty, the believers are to continue their striving against them, firmly trusting that God is their protector, and what an excellent protector, and what an excellent helper. And remember when those who disbelieve planned against you, to imprison you or kill you or expel you, and they schemed, and God schemed, and God is the best of schemers. This verse recalls the time in Makkah before the tide turned and the situation changed. It is a reminder to instill confidence in the future and to highlight the wisdom and decree of God in all that he ordains. The Muslims who first heard this verse in the Qur'an had lived through both phases. They knew the fear and anxiety of the past, and they now experienced the safety and tranquility of the present. It was enough to remind them of those recent days of trepidation and uncertainty, in contrast to the security they now enjoyed, and to reflect on the scheming of the disbelievers against the Prophet, compared to the victory and might he now enjoyed, not merely escaping their clutches, but prevailing over them completely. The disbelievers had plotted to restrain the Prophet, imprisoning him until death, or to kill him outright, or to expel him from Makkah, casting him into exile. They deliberated over all these options, finally deciding on his assassination, assigning the task to a group of young men from various tribes so that his blood would be dispersed among them. In doing so, they hoped to make it impossible for the clan of Banu Hashim to retaliate against all the tribes and force them instead to accept blood money, thus ending the matter. Imam Ahmad narrated that Ibn Abbas said about the verse, "And remember when those who disbelieved planned against you? The Quraysh gathered one night in Makkah. Some of them said, 'When morning comes, bind him in chains,' referring to the Prophet. Others said, 'Rather, kill him.' Yet others said, 'No, expel him.' God informed his Prophet of their plans, so he instructed Ali, may God be pleased with him, to sleep in his bed, while he himself slipped out and made his way to the cave. The disbelievers stood guard over Ali, thinking him to be the Prophet. When morning came, they rushed to him, but when they found Ali instead, God had foiled their plot. They said, 'Where is your companion?' Ali replied, 'I do not know.' They followed his trail, but when they reached the mountain, they lost the scent. They climbed the mountain and passed by the mouth of the cave, but saw a spider's web covering its entrance. They said, 'If he had entered here, the web would not have been intact.' Thus he remained in the cave for 3 nights. And they schemed, and God schemed, and God is the best of schemers. The imagery evoked by the phrase, 'and they schemed and God schemed,' is profoundly impactful. It conjures the scene of the Quraysh council as they conspire and deliberate, unaware that God surrounds them, overturning their schemes while they remain oblivious. It is a deeply ironic and yet terrifying image. How insignificant and helpless are these frail, insignificant beings compared to the omnipotence of God, the all-powerful, the invincible, who reigns over his servants and whose will prevails over all. The Quranic expression paints this scene with its unique artistry, shaking hearts and stirring the depths of human emotion. The narrative continues, describing the ways of the disbelievers, their actions, their false claims, and their fabrications. They even dared to claim that they could produce something like the Qur'an if they wished, dismissing it as nothing more than tales of the ancients. And when our revelations are recited to them, they say, "We have heard this before." If we wished, we could say something like it. This is nothing but tales of the ancients. Ibn Kathir, citing reports from Sayyid ibn Jubayr, al-Sudi, Ibn Jurayj and others, mentions that the one who made this claim was al-Nadir ibn al-Harith. He had travelled to Persia and learned the stories of their kings, such as Rustam and Isfandiar. When he returned, he found that the messenger of God had been sent by God and was reciting the Qur'an to the people. Whenever the prophet spoke, al-Nadir would sit where he had sat and tell the people stories of the Persian kings, asking, "By God, whose tales are better, mine or Muhammad's?" When God granted the Muslims victory at Badr and al-Nadir fell among the captives, the messenger of God ordered his execution. Al-Miqdad Ibn al-Aswad was the one who captured him, and when the prophet commanded his death, al-Miqdad pleaded, "O messenger of God, he is my prisoner." The prophet replied, "He spoke against the book of God and slandered it." At this the prophet ordered his execution, and al-Nadir's neck was struck. Praise be to God. It was regarding him that the verse was revealed, and when our revelations are recited to them, they say, "We have heard this before." If we wished, we could say something like it. This is nothing but tales of the ancients. This claim, repeated by the disbelievers throughout the Qur'an, was merely one of their many maneuvers to undermine the Qur'an. It was a futile attempt to resist its power, for the Qur'an speaks directly to the human soul, addressing its innate nature with a truth that resonates in its depths, stirring it to respond. It confronts the heart with its sovereign authority, and the heart trembles, unable to resist its impact. Faced with this, the leaders of Quraysh resorted to such tactics, knowing full well their baselessness. They sought to liken the Qur'an to the familiar myths of other nations, hoping to deceive the masses of the Arabs and keep them bound within the chains of servitude to their masters. The Quraysh elite understood the nature of this call. They knew that the declaration, "There is no God but God, and Muhammad is the messenger of God," meant rebellion against all human authority, a rejection of the dominion of man over man, and an escape from the tyranny of all created beings to the worship and sovereignty of God alone. It meant severing ties with the old order and submitting solely to the leadership of Muhammad, breaking away from the loyalties of family, tribe and clan, and pledging allegiance entirely to the new Muslim community and its divinely appointed leadership. This, then, was the essence of the testimony that there is no deity but God, and that Muhammad is the messenger of God. It was a reality that the assembly of Quraysh witnessed and felt its threatening shadow over their very existence, over their social, political, economic and ideological structures upon which their entire system was built. The meaning of this testimony, "There is no deity but God, and Muhammad is the messenger of God," was never the pale, hollow and feeble meaning that it holds today for those who claim to be Muslims merely because they utter this testimony with their tongues and observe some ritual acts of worship. For in their lives the sovereignty of God has no presence, no reality, no trace. Meanwhile, it is the pre-Islamic leaderships and laws, ignorant and godless, that govern their societies and direct their affairs. Indeed, in Makkah, Islam had neither a codified law nor a state. Yet those who pronounced the testimony would immediately submit themselves to the leadership of Muhammad, granting their allegiance at once to the Muslim community. At the same time, they would sever their ties with the pre-Islamic leadership, rebel against it, and withdraw their loyalty from their families, clans, tribes, and the leadership of Jahiliyyah, merely by declaring the two testimonies of faith. Thus, it was never a matter of pronouncing hollow and meaningless words. Rather, it was a declaration with profound and practical implications, which translated into a living reality upon which Islam was established. This was what alarmed the assembly of Quraysh about the advance of Islam and this Qur'an. They had not been disturbed before by the Hanifs, who had withdrawn from the beliefs and rituals of the polytheists, worshipping only God and offering their devotions solely to Him while abstaining from idol worship altogether. Up to this point, the pagan tyrants were unperturbed, for there was no danger to them in such passive belief and ritual worship. But this was not Islam, as some well-meaning and kind-hearted individuals today mistakenly think, wishing to be Muslims without truly understanding the essence of Islam. Islam, in reality, is the dynamic movement that accompanies the declaration of the two testimonies. It is the severance from the pre-Islamic society, its concepts, its values, its leadership, its authority, and its laws. It is the allegiance to the leadership of the Islamic call, and to the Muslim community striving to establish Islam in the realm of reality. This is what kept the assembly of Quraysh awake at night, causing them to resist Islam with all manner of strategies, including the claim that the Qur'an was nothing but tales of the ancients, and that they too could produce the like of it if they so wished. Yet, despite their repeated challenges, they were consistently defeated, silenced, and humbled. Tales of the ancients, singularly Ustura, refers to stories often interwoven with mythical imaginings about gods, the legends of old, and their extraordinary exploits, or events in which fantasy and superstition play a significant role. The assembly of Quraysh would focus on the narratives in the Qur'an, the stories of olden times, the miracles and wonders, God's punishment of the disbelievers, and his deliverance of the faithful, and they would tell the gullible masses that these were merely tales of the ancients, which Muhammad had transcribed from others who gathered such stories and then recited to them, claiming it was divinely revealed. In this vein, Al-Nadr ibn al-Harith would sit in the gatherings of the Messenger of God, peace and blessings be upon him, or in neighbouring assemblies recounting Persian tales he had learned during his travels in Persia. He would say to the people, "This is the same as what Muhammad tells you. I do not claim prophethood or revelation as he does. These are but tales like these tales." We must recognize that such distortions caused confusion among the pre-Islamic society, especially in the early days, before the distinction between these tales and the Quran became evident. This helps us understand why the Messenger of God, peace and blessings be upon him, called for the execution of Al-Nadr ibn al-Harith before the Battle of Badr. And when he was captured as a prisoner, he was among the few whom the Prophet ordered to be executed, refusing to accept ransom for him as he did for others. Over time, it became clear in Makkah that these strategies had a limited lifespan. Such maneuvers were eventually exposed, overshadowed by the overwhelming authority of the Quran, an authority that carried with it a divine power and profound truth that resonated swiftly with human nature. These schemes failed to withstand the Quran's force, and the assembly of Quraysh, gripped by terror, resorted to saying, "Do not listen to this Quran, but drown it out with noise so that you may prevail." Even their leaders like Abu Sufyan, Abu Jahl, and Al-Akhnas ibn Shuraik would secretly sneak away, concealing their movements from one another, to spend their nights listening to the Quran in secret. Night after night, their feet would carry them to the place where the Messenger of God, peace and blessings be upon him, recited. They could not resist its pull, until finally they swore solemn oaths to one another never to return, fearing the younger generation might see them and be swayed by the Quran and its message. Yet, Al-Nadr ibn al-Harith's attempt to divert people from the Quran with other distractions was not the last of its kind, nor will it ever be. Such efforts have been repeated in countless forms and will continue to be repeated. Throughout history, the enemies of this faith have sought to draw people away from the Quran entirely. And when they failed, they reduced it to melodious chants sung by reciters or transformed it into amulets and charms carried in pockets, hung on chests, or placed under pillows. They convinced people that this sufficed to make them Muslims, deluding them into thinking they had fulfilled the Quran's rights and the religion's demands. The Quran ceased to be the source of guidance in people's lives. The enemies of this faith crafted alternative sources of direction for every aspect of life, sources from which people derived their concepts and beliefs, laws and regulations, values and measures of worth. Meanwhile, they reassured them that Islam was honoured and that the Qur'an was preserved. "It is recited to you morning and evening and at all times," they would say. "It is sung by singers and chanted by reciters. What more could you want from the Qur'an?" And as for their concepts, systems, laws, and values, they were told to turn to another Qur'an, for those one crafted by other hands and other minds. This is none other than the ploy of al-Nada ibn al-Harith, albeit in a more sophisticated and complex form, adapting to the developments of the times and the intricacies of life. Yet it remains, in essence, the same one of the many forms of scheming that history has known in its relentless opposition to this faith. And yet, what is truly remarkable about the Quran is that, despite the length, complexity, and sophistication of these schemes, it continues to prevail. This book possesses wondrous qualities and an irresistible authority over human nature, enabling it to overcome the schemes of Jahiliyyah in all its forms, as well as the plots of devils among the Jews and Christians, and the global systems they establish in every land and time. This book continues to subdue its enemies, compelling them to broadcast it over the airwaves of the world. It is recited alike by Jews, Christians, and their agents hiding under the banner of Islam. Indeed, they broadcast it after succeeding in reducing it, in the hearts of many Muslims, to mere melodies or amulets. They distanced it even from the thoughts of Muslims from being the source of life's guidance. They replaced it with other sources for all matters of life. Yet this book continues to work behind the scenes of these plots, and it will continue to do so. For in every corner of the earth, there remains a Muslim community bound to the seriousness of this book, taking it alone as their source of guidance. They await the promise of God of victory and empowerment, despite the plotting, destruction, killing, and displacement. What once was shall be again. The narrative then moves on to describe the astonishing obstinacy of the polytheists in the face of the truth, which overwhelms and defeats them, yet their arrogance prevents them from yielding and submitting to its authority. Instead, they pray to God, if this indeed is the truth from him, to rain stones upon them from the skies, or to bring upon them a grievous punishment, rather than asking him to guide them to this truth and align themselves with it. And so they said, O God, if this be the truth from you, then rain down upon us stones from the sky, or bring us a painful punishment. Such a prayer is strange indeed, reflecting a state of defiant arrogance that prefers destruction over submission to the truth, even if it is indeed the truth. A sound nature, when in doubt, seeks God's help to reveal the truth and guide it thereto, without feeling any shame in doing so. But when corrupted by overweening pride, it is overtaken by sinfulness so severe that it prefers annihilation and torment over bowing to the truth when it appears clear and undeniable. With such obstinacy, the polytheists of Makkah faced the call of the messenger of God, peace and blessings be upon him. Yet it was this call that ultimately triumphed, despite their defiant and haughty resistance. The Quranic passage comments on this defiance and their outrageous prayer, stating that despite their deserving a rain of stones from the heavens or a grievous punishment for their sins, and despite the fact that this is indeed the truth from God, he withheld from them the punishment of annihilation that had befallen disbelievers before them. This was because the messenger of God, peace and blessings be upon him, was still among them, continuing to guide them to the truth. Moreover, God does not annihilate a people while they turn to him in repentance, seeking his forgiveness. It was not because they were the custodians of the sacred house that they were spared, for they are not its true custodians, rather its guardians are the God-conscious. But God would not punish them while you are among them, nor would he punish them while they seek forgiveness. Yet why should God not punish them when they obstruct others from the sacred mosque, even though they are not its guardians? Its guardians are none but the righteous, though most of them do not know. Their prayer at the house was nothing but whistling and clapping. So taste the punishment for your disbelief. This is the mercy of God, granting them respite, sparing them from annihilation despite their defiance and their obstruction of the sacred mosque, where they had prevented the Muslims from performing their pilgrimage while allowing everyone else free access. It is the mercy of God that grants them respite, in the hope that some among them, those whose hearts may yet be touched by the radiance of faith, will respond to the guidance, even if after a while. And so long as the messenger, peace and blessings be upon him, remains among them, calling them to the truth, there is still the expectation that some of them will answer his call. Thus, for the honor of the messenger's presence among them, they are given this divine reprieve. The path to avoid the punishment of annihilation remains open, should they respond, seek forgiveness, and turn back in repentance for what they have done. But God would not punish them while you are among them, nor would he punish them while they seek forgiveness. Yet, were God to treat them in accordance with the reality of their deeds, they would indeed deserve this punishment. And what is there to prevent God from punishing them when they bar others from the sacred mosque, which is not theirs to protect? Its true custodians are none but the God-conscious, though most of them do not know. It is not their claim to be the heirs of Abraham, nor their guardianship of the sacred house that shields them from punishment. These claims are but empty words, devoid of truth. They are not the true custodians of this house, nor is it truly theirs. In reality, they are its enemies and usurpers. The sacred house of God is not an inheritance passed down from one generation to the next. It is the house of God, and its true heirs are the God-conscious, those who stand in awe of him. And their claim to be the heirs of Abraham, peace be upon him, is equally baseless. The legacy of Abraham is not one of blood and lineage, it is a legacy of faith and conviction. The true heirs of Abraham are the God-conscious, those who uphold the faith of Abraham and the sacred house that he built for God. Yet, here they are, barring his true heirs, the believers in the faith of Abraham, from the sacred house. They are not the custodians of this house, even though they perform what they call prayers there. But what kind of prayer is this? It is nothing but whistling with their mouths and clapping with their hands, a disorderly clamour devoid of dignity, reverence for the sacred house, or humility before the majesty of God. It is narrated by Ibn Umar, may God be pleased with him, that he said they would place their cheeks on the ground, whistling and clapping their hands. Such an image brings to mind the scenes of musicians and loud clappers who prostrate their faces on thresholds and shrines in many of the lands today that are called lands of Islam. It is but another manifestation of Jahiliyyah, appearing in one of its countless forms. When Jahiliyyah rears its head in the most blatant and profound way, where men set themselves as gods over others and claim sovereignty over human lives, all other forms of Jahiliyyah are but extensions and branches of this. So, taste the punishment for your disbelief. This was the punishment that befell them at Badr at the hands of the Muslim community. As for the punishment they themselves invoked, the annihilating punishment of total destruction, it was withheld out of God's mercy for them and in honour of the presence of the Prophet, peace and blessings be upon him, among them, in the hope that they might yet repent and seek forgiveness for their ways. The disbelievers spend their wealth to support one another in barring others from the path of God. This is what they did on the day of Badr, as we have mentioned in the context of the accounts of this great battle in the books of history. And after Badr, they continued to prepare for the next confrontation. Yet God warns them of the futility of their efforts, of the regret they will feel over their squandered wealth, and of their ultimate defeat in this world and their punishment in the hereafter. Indeed, those who disbelieve spend their wealth to bar others from the path of God. But they will continue to spend it only for it to become a source of regret for them, and then they will be overcome. And those who disbelieve will be gathered in hell, that God may separate the wicked from the good, and place the wicked one upon another, heaping them all together and cast them into hell. They are the losers. It is narrated by Muhammad ibn Ishaq, on the authority of Al-Zuhri and others, that when Quraysh suffered defeat at Badr, and their defeated army returned to Makkah, alongside Abu Sufyan, who had returned with his caravan, certain men of Quraysh, such as Abdullah ibn Rabi'ah, Ikrimah ibn Abi Jahl, and Safwan ibn Umayyah, approached Abu Sufyan and others who had been involved in the caravan. They said, "O people of Quraysh, Muhammad has struck you and killed the best among you. Help us with this wealth to wage war against him, so that we may avenge those who have fallen." And they did so. Ibn Abbas, may God be pleased with him, narrates that it was in reference to them that God revealed, "Indeed, those who disbelieve spend their wealth." This event, which occurred before and after Badr, is but one example of the traditional methods employed by the enemies of this faith. They expend their wealth, exhaust their efforts, and draw upon their schemes to bar others from the path of God, to place obstacles in the way of this religion, and to wage war against the Muslim community wherever and whenever they can. The battle is unceasing. The enemies of this faith will never leave it in peace, nor will they allow the followers of this faith to live in security. The path of this religion is to move forward, to confront Jahiliyyah and its power, and the path for its followers is to rise and destroy the capacity of Jahiliyyah to wage aggression, raising high the banner of God so that no tyrant may dare challenge it. God glorified and exalted is clear in his warning to the disbelievers who spend their wealth to bar others from his path. Their wealth will return to them as a cause of regret. They will spend it only to see it wasted in the end, to be defeated in this world while the truth triumphs. And in the hereafter they will be gathered into hell, where their ultimate regret will be realized. That God may separate the wicked from the good, and place the wicked one upon another, heaping them all together and cast them into hell. They are the losers. But how does this come to pass? The wealth spent by the disbelievers emboldens falsehood and grants it the means to wage its aggression. In response, the truth is compelled to rise in struggle, in jihad, and to act decisively to nullify the power of falsehood and its ability to act. In this bitter struggle, the true nature of people is revealed. The truth is distinguished from falsehood, as are the people of truth from the people of falsehood, even among those who initially stood under the banner of truth before the trial of struggle and test. It is here that the steadfast, patient and persevering are revealed those who are worthy of God's victory, for they have proven themselves capable of bearing the trust of faith, upholding it, and not faltering under the weight of tribulation and trial. At this point, God gathers the wicked together and hurls them into hell. That is the ultimate loss. The Quranic expression vividly portrays wickedness as though it were a physical mass, a pile of filth, to be gathered and cast into the fire without concern or regard. He heaps them all together and casts them into hell. This imagery deepens the impact of the message upon the soul. Such is the way of the Qur'an in its profound expressions and influence. When the discourse reaches this definitive declaration regarding the fate of disbelief and the accumulated wickedness, the address turns to the messenger of God, peace and blessings be upon him, commanding him to deliver a final warning to the disbelievers. The message also turns to the Muslim community, commanding them to strive and fight until there is no longer any strife on earth, and until all faith belongs to God alone. The believers are then reassured that God is their protector and helper, and no one can overcome them, neither in battle nor in conspiracy, for God is their ally and their ultimate supporter. Say to those who disbelieve, if they desist, their past will be forgiven. But if they return, then the precedent of the earlier peoples has already passed. And fight them until there is no strife, and all faith belongs to God. But if they desist, then surely God sees all that they do. And if they turn away, then know that God is your protector. What an excellent protector, what an excellent helper. Say to those who disbelieve, in light of the preceding divine decree regarding their ultimate failure, their regret over wasted wealth, and their disgrace in this world before their accumulated wickedness is hurled into hell. Say to those who disbelieve, if they desist, their past will be forgiven. But if they return, then the precedent of the earlier peoples has already passed. The opportunity is still open before them should they cease their disbelief, their hostility against Islam and its followers, and their spending of wealth to bar others from God's path. The way is open for them to repent from all of this and to return to God. If they do so, all that has preceded will be forgiven, for Islam wipes away what came before it, and a person enters Islam as pure as the day they were born. But if they persist after this clear statement in their disbelief and aggression, then God's way with the earlier peoples will not be altered. His way has always been to punish those who reject the truth after it has been conveyed to them, and to grant victory, dignity and empowerment to his allies. This divine way shall not fail, and the disbelievers stand at the crossroads, free to choose their destiny. Thus, the conversation with those who disbelieve comes to an end, and the discourse turns to those who believe. And fight them until there is no more oppression, and all worship is devoted to God alone. But if they desist, then surely God sees all that they do. Yet if they turn away, then know that God is your protector, an excellent protector, and an excellent helper. These are the limits of striving in the way of God, limits that are valid for all time, not merely for that time. And although the verses concerning striving in this surah and the laws governing war and peace are not the final pronouncements on this matter, for the ultimate revelations in this regard were revealed in Surah At-Tawbah, which came down in the 9th year of the Hijrah. The principles outlined here are enduring. As we mentioned in the introduction to this surah, Islam is a dynamic movement, confronting the reality of human existence with means that are proportionate and appropriate to its circumstances and needs at every stage of its unfolding. Yet despite this, the verse, "And fight them until there is no more oppression, and all worship is devoted to God alone," lays down an eternal principle for the Islamic movement in its confrontation with the ever-recurring realities of a world steeped in jahiliyyah of divine guidance. Indeed, Islam came, as we have already explained, when introducing this surah as a universal proclamation for the liberation of man on earth from servitude to other human beings and from the servitude to his own base desires, which is but another form of servitude to human beings. This liberation is achieved through the declaration of God's exclusive divinity, exalted be He and His sole sovereignty over all creation. The essence of this proclamation is a comprehensive revolution against human governance in all its forms, shapes, systems, and manifestations, a complete rebellion against any order anywhere on earth wherein human beings rule over others in any guise whatsoever. To achieve this monumental goal, two essential measures must be undertaken. The first is to repel oppression and persecution from those who embrace this faith and who declare their freedom from human dominion, returning their servitude exclusively to God. Such liberation entails breaking free from the bonds of human authority in all its forms and expressions. This cannot be accomplished without a group of believers, bound together in a dynamic and organized community under leadership that believes in this universal proclamation, implements it in the realm of reality, and strives against every tyrant who inflicts oppression and persecution upon those who follow this faith, or who, through force, coercion, or manipulation, prevents others from embracing it. The second measure is to destroy every power on earth that is founded on the servitude of human beings to one another in any of its manifestations. This is necessary to guarantee the first objective and to establish God's exclusive sovereignty throughout the earth, so that there remains no authority to which human beings submit except His. For here, religion means nothing less than the submission to the authority of God. It is not merely a matter of belief. At this point, it is imperative to clarify a misunderstanding that may arise from this discussion, especially since God, exalted be He, has said, "There shall be no compulsion in religion," for the truth stands out clearly from error. Although what has already been established regarding the nature of striving in Islam, particularly in the excerpts we have drawn from the book Jihad in the Way of God by the esteemed scholar Abu al-Ala al-Maududi, is sufficient for clarity, we shall further elucidate the matter, given the abundance of distortions and deceptions propagated by the enemies of this faith. What the verse, "so that all worship may be devoted to God alone," means is the removal of material barriers embodied in the authority of tyrants and oppressive systems that prevent individuals from freely choosing their faith. Thus, when these material barriers are eliminated, there will no longer be any authority on earth besides that of God. At that point, people will be left as individuals, free to choose their beliefs without any coercion. However, this freedom is contingent upon the condition that any belief system contrary to Islam does not manifest itself as an organized force capable of coercing others or obstructing those who seek the path of guidance. Nor should it oppress those who have already freed themselves from all authority save that of God. People are free to choose their faith, but they must do so as individuals, without forming an oppressive power to which others must submit. For submission belongs only to the sovereignty of the sustainer of all creation. Humanity will never attain the dignity bestowed upon it by God, nor will man be truly free on earth until all worship is devoted to God alone, and no authority is acknowledged except His. For this noble purpose does the community of believers fight, until there is no more oppression, and all worship is devoted to God alone. Whoever accepts this principle and declares their submission to it, the Muslims accept their declaration and submission without probing their intentions or what lies hidden in their hearts, leaving that to God. But if they desist, then surely God sees all that they do. And whoever turns away and persists in resisting God's authority, the Muslims fight them, relying on God's aid. Yet if they turn away, then know that God is your protector, an excellent protector, and an excellent helper. These are the obligations of this faith, obligations that reflect its seriousness, realism, and dynamism as it strives to establish itself in the realm of reality and affirm God's exclusive sovereignty over human affairs. This faith is not merely a theory that people study in books for intellectual indulgence or the accumulation of knowledge, nor is it merely a passive creed that people practice privately in their relationship with their sustainer. It is not even just a set of devotional rituals performed by individuals in isolation. Rather, this faith is a universal proclamation for the liberation of humanity. It is a dynamic, practical methodology that confronts the realities of human existence with appropriate and proportionate means. It addresses the barriers of understanding and perception through communication and clarification, and it confronts the barriers of oppressive systems and authority through materials striving to demolish the dominion of false gods and establish the sovereignty of God. The movement of this faith is a movement within the human reality, and the struggle between it and the Jahiliyyah of divine guidance is not merely a theoretical conflict addressed with mere theory, for Jahiliyyah manifests itself in societies, systems, and authorities. To confront it, this faith must also manifest itself in society, systems, and authority. Thereafter, it must strive so that all worship is devoted to God alone, and no authority besides His is acknowledged. This is the dynamic, practical, and positive methodology of this faith, not the distorted interpretations offered by the defeated and the deluded, even if they are sincere and well-intentioned individuals who wish to be among the Muslims, but whose understanding of this faith remains clouded and confused. Praise be to God who has guided us to this, for we would not have been guided had God not guided us. Thus concludes the 9th part of this discourse, and the 10th part begins with his words. And know that whatever spoils of war you gain, 1/5 of it belongs to God and the messenger. We've already outlined the primary themes of this surah at the beginning of this commentary, at the end of the 9th part. The remaining verses continue along these same lines. However, what is strikingly evident in the context of this surah is that this latter portion almost mirrors the first portion in its structure and arrangement, though without repetition, as the topics themselves are renewed. The arrangement of these topics, however, creates a remarkable harmony between the two parts, as though each constitutes a distinct cycle within an overarching unity. The first cycle begins with the discussion of the spoils of war and their disputes over them, returning the matter to God and His messenger. It then calls them to piety and explains to them the essence of true faith so that they may rise to it. This is followed by a revelation of God's planning and decree in the battle over which they dispute, bringing to light aspects of the confrontation and its scenes, showing that all planning is with God, all support is from Him, and the entire battle is conducted to fulfill His will. The believers are but a veil and an instrument. From this unveiling of the truth of the battle, they are called to steadfastness in the face of the enemy, reassured by God's support and presence, and reminded of His thwarting of their enemies and His punishment for their sins. They are then warned against betraying God and His messenger, or being seduced by wealth and children. The messenger is instructed to caution the disbelievers about the consequences of their ways and to accept their response if they respond leaving their secrets to God. The believers are commanded to fight them, if they persist, until there is no more oppression and all worship is devoted to God alone. And thus proceeds this second section, beginning with the clarification of God's ruling regarding the spoils of war after having returned their ownership to God and his messenger. Then it calls them to faith in God and in what he revealed to his servant on the day of distinction, the day when the two forces met. Thereafter it unveils for them God's design and decree in that battle which brought about these spoils. And it recalls another aspect of the confrontation and its scenes, a dimension where God's wisdom and planning become manifest, showing them that they were but instruments of his divine will and veils for his decree. From this revelation of the deeper truth of the battle, they are urged toward steadfastness when facing the enemy, toward remembrance of God, toward obedience to him and his messenger. They are warned against disputes which lead to failure and collapse, and are exhorted to patience. They are also cautioned against arrogance and hypocrisy in striving for God's cause, and they are reminded of the fate of the disbelievers who left their homes in boastfulness and vanity, to parade before people and to turn others away from the path of God, deluded by the deception of Satan. Finally, they are called to place their trust in God alone, for he is the mighty one, capable of granting victory, and the wise in his decrees and planning. Then God reminds them of his way with those who deny the truth and reject him, bringing destruction upon them due to their sins. Just as in the earlier section, angels were mentioned as strengthening the believers and striking the necks and hands of the disbelievers, so too in this second section the angels appear again, this time taking the souls of the disbelievers, striking their faces and backs. And just as it was stated earlier that the disbelievers are the vilest of creatures, this description is repeated here in the context of their repeated violations of covenants, whenever they made them, setting the stage for the commands God will give to his messenger, peace and blessings be upon him, regarding how to deal with them, both in war and in peace. These commands constitute detailed rulings for the relationships between the Muslim camp and those hostile or neutral camps surrounding it. Some of these rulings are final, while others were later completed in Surah Al-Tawbah. At this point, this second cycle in the surah closely mirrors both in the nature of its themes and their arrangement within the context the first cycle, albeit with greater elaboration on the rulings governing the interactions between the Islamic community and other camps. Toward the end of the chapter, additional topics and rulings are introduced that are connected to and complementary to the earlier themes. God, exalted is he, reminds his messenger, peace and blessings be upon him, and those who have believed with him of his grace upon them in uniting their hearts. These hearts had been resistant to unity, and it would not have been possible to bring them together except by God's will, mercy and grace. He reassures them of his sufficiency and protection, and then commands his messenger to urge the believers to fight. He shows them that through their faith, if they remain patient, they are capable of standing firm against an enemy 10 times their number. For the disbelievers lack understanding because they do not believe. Even in their weakest state, the believers are equal in strength to twice their number of disbelievers, provided they remain steadfast. And God is with those who persevere. Then God reproaches them for having accepted ransom for prisoners of war, even though they had not yet achieved decisive mastery in the land, nor broken the power of their enemy, nor established their authority securely. By doing so, he establishes the methodology of the Islamic movement in its various phases and under differing circumstances, demonstrating the flexibility of this methodology and its realism in confronting the realities of life at each stage. God also explains to them how they should treat the prisoners in their possession, how to attract them to faith, and endear it to their hearts. Yet he also warns the prisoners against attempting betrayal again. For God, who enabled the believers to capture them the first time when they betrayed him through disbelief, will enable them to prevail against such treachery again, should they attempt to betray his messenger. Peace and blessings be upon him. Finally, the chapter concludes with rulings organizing the relationships within the Muslim community itself, as well as with those groups who enter Islam but do not join the domain of Islam. and with the disbelievers under specific circumstances, and as a general principle. These rulings reveal the nature of the Islamic community and the overall methodology of Islam. It becomes abundantly clear that the dynamic movement of the Islamic community is the foundation of its existence, from which all its rulings, both internal and external, arise. It is impossible to separate faith and law in this religion from the movement and actual existence of the Muslim society. This, then, suffices as a brief introduction, allowing us to now engage with the Quranic text in detail. And know that whatever spoils of war you gain indeed, a fifth thereof belongs to God, to the messenger, to near relatives, orphans, the needy, and the traveller, if you have believed in God and in what we revealed to our servant on the day of distinction, the day when the two forces met. And God has power over all things. 841. Remember when you were on the near side of the valley, and they were on the far side, and the caravan was below you. Even if you had made an appointment to meet, you would surely have failed to agree on the time. But it happened as it did, so that God might accomplish a matter already destined, that those who perished through disbelief would perish upon evidence, and those who lived in faith would live upon evidence. And indeed, God is hearing and knowing. 842. When God showed them to you in your dream as few, and if he had shown them to you as many, you believers would have lost courage and disputed in the matter. But God saved you. Indeed, he is knowing of what is within the hearts. 843. And remember when he showed them to you, when you met, as few in your eyes, and he made you appear as few in their eyes, so that God might accomplish a matter already destined, and to God all matters will be returned. 844. O you who have believed, when you encounter a force, be firm, and remember God often that you may succeed. 845. And obey God and his messenger, and do not dispute and thus lose courage and your strength depart. And be patient. Indeed, God is with the patient. 846. And do not be like those who came forth from their homes boastfully, and to be seen by people and avert others from the way of God. And God is encompassing of what they do. 847. And remember when Satan made their deeds pleasing to them and said, no one can overcome you today from among the people, and indeed I am your protector. But when the two armies sighted each other, he turned on his heels and said, indeed I am disassociated from you. Indeed, I see what you do not see. Indeed, I fear God, and God is severe in penalty. 848. And so the themes of this passage are directly linked to the conclusion of the previous section in the 9th part of the Qur'an, continuing the discourse on the rulings of warfare that began there. Say to those who disbelieve, if they desist, their past will be forgiven. But if they return to hostility, then the precedent of the former peoples has already occurred. And fight them until there is no fitna, and until the religion, all of it, is for God. And if they cease, then indeed God is seeing of what they do. But if they turn away, then know that God is your protector. Excellent is the protector, and excellent is the helper. 838-40. The discussion continues in this section regarding the spoils of war arising from the victory in that battle, whose ultimate purpose had been clearly defined. Until there is no fitna and the religion, all of it is for God. Although the ultimate aim of striving in God's cause has been clarified and its purpose established as entirely devoted to God's call, his religion and his way of life, and although the ownership of the spoils of war had already been settled by returning them to God and his messenger, thereby purifying the intentions and actions of the believers nonetheless, the Quranic methodology addresses the actual realities of life with rulings that regulate them. There are spoils of war and there are fighters. These fighters strive in God's cause with their wealth and their lives. They volunteer for jihad, equipping themselves at their own expense, and often equipping others who cannot afford to do so. They endure the hardships of battle and gain spoils through their patience, endurance, and sacrifices. God purified their hearts of any lingering attachment to these spoils by initially assigning their ownership to himself and his messenger. Thus, there was no harm in granting them a share of these spoils while ensuring they understood that it was a gift from God and his messenger. This approach fulfilled their material needs and human sentiments without giving rise to disputes or greed, following the decisive ruling revealed at the beginning of the chapter. This is the methodology of God, who knows the nature of human beings and deals with them through a balanced and comprehensive approach, one that fulfills the needs of reality as well as human emotions, while also guarding against the corruption of hearts and society that could result from the desire for material gain. And know that whatever you gain as spoils of war, then indeed a fifth thereof belongs to God, and to the messenger, and to the near of kin, and to the orphans, and to the needy, and to the wayfarer, if you truly believe in God, and in what we bestowed upon our servant on the day of distinction, the day when the two hosts met in battle. For God has power over all things. Yet among the transmitted traditions and the juristic opinions there is a lengthy dispute. First, concerning the term spoils of war, ganima, and the term booty, anfal, are they one and the same, or are they two distinct provisions? Second, concerning the fifth portion reserved for God and his messenger, which remains after the 4/5 granted to the combatants, how is this fifth to be distributed? Third, regarding the fifth of this fifth that belongs to God, does it coincide with the share of the messenger, or is it an independent allotment? Fourth, regarding the fifth of the fifth belonging to the messenger of God, peace and blessings be upon him, was it exclusively his, or does it pass to every subsequent leader of the Muslim community? Fifth, concerning the fifth of the fifth designated for the near of kin, does it remain among the kin of the messenger, peace and blessings be upon him, from the clans of Banu Hashim and Banu Abd al-Muttalib as it was during his lifetime, or does it revert to the discretion of the Muslim ruler? Sixth, are these fifths fixed allocations to specific categories, or is the entire fifth left to the discretion of the messenger of God, peace and blessings be upon him, and his successors, and so on, with other subordinate debates? Now, as is our method in these reflections, we do not delve into such intricate jurisprudential details, which are better sought in their specialized fields. This is a general principle. But more specifically, the matter of spoils of war as a whole is not a presently relevant concern for the Islamic reality we face today. For today, we are not confronted with a practical issue. We are not standing before a Muslim state, a Muslim leadership, or a Muslim community actively striving in the cause of God, wherein spoils of war arise that require adjudication. The cycle of time has turned back to its original state, as it was when this religion first came to humanity. And humanity has returned to the state of Jahiliyyah. It was upon then associating with God other lords who governed their lives with man-made laws and systems. Indeed, this religion has retraced its steps, calling people anew to bear witness that there is no deity but God, and that Muhammad is the messenger of God, to dedicate all divinity, authority and sovereignty solely to God, and to derive guidance in all matters exclusively from the messenger of God. It calls for the formation of a Muslim community unified under a Muslim leadership, striving to re-establish this religion as a living reality in the life of humankind. It calls for the complete transfer of loyalty to this community and its leadership, removing it from all allegiance to the societies of Jahiliyyah and their leaders. This, then, is the living, pressing issue that confronts this religion today. There is, at the outset, no other issue. There is no question of spoils of war, for there is no question of jihad. Indeed, there is no single organizational issue to contend with, whether in internal relations or external relations. And why? For the simple reason that there is no independent existing Islamic society requiring the legal rulings that regulate its internal affairs and its relationships with other societies. The Islamic methodology is one rooted in reality. It does not preoccupy itself with hypothetical or non-existent issues. Consequently, it does not engage in rulings concerning matters that have no presence in reality. This methodology is far too earnest and pragmatic to concern itself with abstract jurisprudence. This is not the way of this religion. Such preoccupations are the distractions of idle minds, who expend their time in theoretical debates and legalistic rulings where there is no corresponding reality. instead of channeling their efforts into the reconstruction of the Muslim community according to the dynamic, practical methodology of this religion itself, a methodology that calls people to affirm that there is no deity but God and that Muhammad is the messenger of God. Through this proclamation arises a new community entering into this religion just as people entered it in the first instance. From this re-entry into the faith emerges a dynamic movement with Muslim leadership, exclusive loyalty, and an independent identity distinct from Jahili societies. Then God grants victory through truth between this community and its people. Only then, and only then, do the legal rulings required for organizing relationships within and beyond this community become relevant. At that time, and only at that time, will the jurists exert their efforts to derive rulings that address the pressing realities of the moment, both internal and external. And only then, will such juristic efforts acquire their legitimacy, their seriousness, and their relevance. It is in light of this understanding of the serious, dynamic, and practical methodology of this religion that we refrain here from engaging in the intricate jurisprudential details surrounding spoils of war and booty. This will become meaningful only in its due time, when God wills, when an Islamic society arises, and when the reality of jihad emerges, giving rise to spoils that necessitate rulings. For now, it suffices us in these reflections to trace the foundational principle of faith as it manifests in its historical dynamic context and through the Quranic pedagogical methodology. This is the constant element that is unaffected by the vicissitudes of time in this noble book. All other matters are secondary and contingent upon it. The general principle contained in the Quranic text is, "And know that whatever you gain as spoils of war, then indeed a fifth thereof belongs to God, and to the messenger, and to the near of kin, and to the orphans, and to the needy, and to the wayfarer." This can be summarized as 4/5 of the spoils are returned to the combatants, while the remaining fifth is left to the discretion of the messenger of God, peace and blessings be upon him, and the Muslim leaders after him, leaders who uphold the Sharia of God and strive in his cause. This fifth is to be allocated to the categories specified: God, the messenger, the near of kin, the orphans, the needy, and the wayfarer, addressing the needs that arise when such spoils exist. And this suffices. As for the enduring guidance beyond that, it is contained in the latter part of the verse. If you truly believe in God and in what we bestowed upon our servant on the day of distinction, the day when the two hosts met in battle, for God has power over all things. Faith has signs that bear witness to its existence. God Most High conditions his acknowledgement of the people of Badr, as believers in him and in what he revealed to his servant on the day of distinction, on their acceptance of the divine ruling concerning the spoils of war, stated at the beginning of the verse. He makes this ruling a prerequisite for recognizing their faith in him and in what he revealed to his servant in the Qur'an. He also makes it a necessary condition for the declaration of faith itself, a condition that must be fulfilled for the claim of faith to be valid. Thus, the meaning of faith in the Qur'an is clear and decisive, without ambiguity, evasion, or reinterpretation. It is unlike the jurisprudential complexities that emerged later, with the development of sects, schools of thought, and interpretive disputes. It is unlike the contentious debates and hypothetical constructs that accompanied sectarian and political divisions, wherein accusations of disbelief and their rebuttals became tainted by ulterior motives, personal desires, and rivalries. It was in this context that some began accusing their opponents of disbelief over secondary matters, while others responded by becoming excessively cautious and severe in rejecting such accusations. Both extremes represent an overreach born of historical circumstances, but the religion of God remains clear and decisive, without ambiguity, evasion, or excess. Faith is not wishful thinking, but that which resides firmly in the heart and is proven by action. For it to be established, one must accept and implement what God has decreed in reality. Disbelief, on the other hand, is the rejection of what God has decreed, the judgment by other than what God has revealed, and the recourse to laws other than his, whether in minor or major matters. These are explicit, decisive, simple, and clear rulings. Everything beyond this stems from the divisions, interpretations, and disputes that arose later.